Everybody. Welcome to the 14th of June Infrastructure Services Committee meeting. We have one item in public forum, and that's Lyndon Wiggery and Ray McLeod from the Greater Dunedin Action Group, if you guys want to come forward and address the meeting. Welcome, Ray and Lyndon. You've got your mics in front of you.
That turns it on. Oh, you might regret that one. Never mind. So thank you, Chairman O'Malley and councillors, for giving us the opportunity to speak. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Ray McLeod and I chair the South Dunedin Action Group. So the water is obviously a great topic for us, and the Three Waters reform is also something we are interested in, and how it may impact on residents and ratepayers of this fine city. We are aware that an update was presented to councillors in May, but for some of us, and I wasn't at that meeting, listening to your remarks and the concerns in particular at that meeting, we felt it appropriate to come along and address this public forum, and you especially in your capacity as chairperson. So we're worried about the potential loss of control of a valuable local asset, and it is a concern, as you will be familiar with, the fact that a lot of ratepayers' money has gone into upgrades of our water system in the past 30 years. And I refer, of course, to the upgrade of our water that was started under the late Mayor Richard Walls, that was started under Mayor Richard Walls and finished under the tenure of Suki Turner. And that brought our water up to an A+ grade, where it remains today. And thankfully, mishaps such as the much reported and frequently misquoted Havelock North debacle has never been an experience that we've suffered. The recent controversy at Waikawaiti is being addressed by pipe renewals, and I probably should admit that I was a young engineer at the time who worked on some of the early part of that system, so hand up. And it is being addressed by pipe renewals, which will hopefully eliminate the need of the lead contamination issue. Under Mayor Peter Chin, millions were spent upgrading wastewater treatment at Tahuna, which is first class by most standards. And now we are turning our attention to upgrading pipes, our pipe network, including stormwater reticulation, and I'm sure that a good proportion of the money set aside under the long-term plan will be used on this initiative. For our efforts in the past 30 years, it is encouraging to see from page 14 of the Morrison Lowe report that Council has met the current 100% benchmark on all three waters, in sharp contrast to many other southern councils. So the question remains, why should we relinquish control and open local residents and ratepayers up to ever-increasing water charges that will be outside of our control, that will be fixed by a new water board entity, that will have professional directors appointed to oversee its operation, and we will have less influence over. Currently, $1,000 of the average local rate bill of $2,400 is a fixed charge for three waters. We assure ratepayers are resigned to continuing to pay this as long as it is faithfully spent. But if for some reason the situation does change and a centralised bureaucratic control priorities are at odds with our own community priorities, will the loss of this function mean a substantial reduction in rates in line with the savings made? In this regard, we note on page 23 of the Morrison Lowe report that the weighted average combined charge for the region is currently approximately $924. From your own briefing papers, we are aware that the Council has signed a memorandum of understanding with government to explore how the Three Waters reform could be delivered in the future. And we're particularly pleased to see that any council has the option of opting out of this process as it relates to service delivery reforms in the last quarter of this year. This option needs to be kept in mind and exercised should your initial concerns, if any, not be alleviated. And if that becomes the overwhelmingly favoured choice of the majority of ratepayers and residents of Dunedin City, obviously the best way to measure the resolve and will of local people is to conduct extensive and genuine consultation with us at appropriate times. History tells us that reforms of this magnitude do not necessarily turn out for the overall good of the people, and central control of community assets raises enormous risks and will place a different emphasis on the relative importance of infrastructure investment, often on political rather than practical or as needed basis. The Bradford electricity reforms of 1989 are a case in point where the government of the day forced Dunedin City Council to choose between retaining or selling off Waipori. It is history, but we chose to retain the Dunedin electricity, so we chose to retain the latter, and the recent Aurora Energy issue is a case in point. We needn't remind you that we are all faced with much higher line charges to make up the mismanagement of that company. The Greater Dunedin Action Group looks forward to working with Council on future consultations, and succinctly, we have little faith in the loss of influence and control to central government planners with potentially different agendas. So, if I was to summarise that, our concern is simply that as a community and even around this table, you guys can set, and girls can set priorities on what we spend our money on and rank them according to our immediate need. The big issue is if this is controlled centrally, we may actually
we're
lose.
just getting near the end of your time, so if you just...
Sorry?
You're at the 5-minute mark, so...
Yep, that was just simply what I was going to say, is that if control is taken to a central point, then they may not actually place the required or the same emphasis that we would like to see placed on that investment. Thank you, Chairman.
Very much. Does anybody have any questions? Your Worship.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Tēnā koroa. Thanks for coming. You've widened the remit of your group to Dunedin more generally.
No, I did notice that slip, Mr. Mayor.
And just because you said that just now, that's why I asked.
No, I mean, we're still very much South Dunedin orientated, but we have our own water issues, as you appreciate.
Yeah. My question really is around what do you see as and we have many of the same questions as you do that remain unanswered in terms of the reform program, but what do you see as the greatest risk? Is it the lack of influence that we would have strategically in terms of what the levels of service are and where they might be in the city, or is it the risk at a household scale of increased charges, etc., from a corporatised, potentially future privatised water service delivery model?
A few questions in there, Mr. Mayor. I mean, one risk is who owns the underlying property that we're collecting water from, or who owns the infrastructure easements and who owns the infrastructure, and what that compensation may look like. Secondly, I don't think, having worked for central government at one stage in my life, I don't think that someone making decisions in Wellington, and we've only got to look at health reforms and education reforms and the takeover of politics to go, I'm just a bit damn nervous about this, in terms of how practical it is to service the needs of the community that we live in, as opposed to the needs of a central government planning agency.
Any other questions? I just have one. Thank you very much for your presentation. As His Worship said, you're pretty much saying what's going through our heads at the same time. Do you see the major issue here then the potential transfer of the assets away from the city to another regulatory group? We've got to meet what's coming in the bill through fresh water, which will actually probably incur more costs on it, but is it your concern really sitting around the transfer of the assets as it stands right now and the uncertainty of what that even means?
I think there's certainly uncertainties around that. What concerns me more than anything is the treatment of those assets going forward. So are we going to get central planning commitment to continuing to maintain our infrastructure system on an ongoing and annual basis with significant, say, capital investment requirements every time we need to upgrade for whatever reason that may be. So it's the lack of control, the lack of input, the lack of influence. I mean, you guys actually have done quite well in water in most areas, and we note that, and we thank you for it, and we thank previous councils for it. But taking the decision away from the community to a central planning format is just not something that I'm particularly comfortable with.
Well, thanks very much for coming.
No, you're most welcome. Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Move on to item number 2, apologies. I've got an apology for Council Hall for lateness. Move that we accept those apologies. Councillor Staines moves it, seconds Councillor Walker. All those in favour? Very good. Item 3, confirmation of the agenda. I move to confirm the agenda and that the committee confirms the agenda without addition or alteration. Second to Councillor Walker. All those in favour? Cool. Item 4, declarations of interest. Does anybody, Councillor Fiso?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I am no longer National Secretary for Pacifica Incorporated. Instead, I am the National Communications Officer, and I have advised government support officers of this. Thank you.
I move then that the committee amends the elected members' interest register and the proposed management plan for elected members' interest. I have a seconder. Councillor Staines. All those in favour? Very good. Item 5, confirmations of minutes. Ready to move? Okay.
No,
No,
sorry.
you have a question, I take it.
I have a correction to make to the minutes. My apologies. I meant to send this through this morning, but I got distracted. Under apologies, relevant, received is spelt alternatively. So I'm happy to move with that correction.
I'm happy to second it. All those in favour? Very good. Part A reports. Actions and resolutions from the Infrastructure Services Committee meetings. Any questions? I'll move that the committee notes the open actions and resolutions of the Infrastructure Services Committee. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Lord. All those in favour? Aye. Item 7, Infrastructure Services Committee Forward Works Programme. Any questions? I move then that the committee notes the Infrastructure Services Forward Works Programme. Second to Councillor Walker. All those in favour? Very good. Item 8, update from governance entities. I don't think anybody presents this, do they? Do they? No. I do. These are the minutes from Connecting Dunedin and the Regional Transport Committee. I will just draw your attention to page 37. Where got to find page 37 now. It's the meeting dates for Connecting Dunedin. We did not have the 4th of March meeting and the 7th of June meeting. Our 3rd of June meeting was during our long-term plan, so it's been moved to later on this month. The 4th of March meeting was not held because it was felt by staff that because we're in a consultation period, they didn't want to discuss any matters at the point that were coming up for consultation. Page 39, which is the Regional Transport Committee, there's a note there that I asked a question and it relates to George Street and the funding of George Street by NZTA. That still remains as it is, so I think that's just something for us to watch as we go forward. I very much doubt that it will not get funded, but it sits lower on the funding scale than it normally should. Okay, any questions, Your Worship?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't know, I know this is here for noting the minutes and that's not unhelpful, but in terms of how we might input into the discussions of these entities, that's not particularly clear to me, mostly around we've taken a fairly strong position in our submission on the regional land transport plan, for example, that we no longer wanted that to be done at an Otago Southland scale. I'm just making sure that, and it wouldn't be in the work program of this committee or of this council, but just need to make sure that that is being progressed or that conversation is being had at some point. And I'm happy to raise it as under items for notification at the end of this meeting, but it just seemed like an apposite time to raise it now.
Thank you. In fact, that's why I'm putting these minutes for noting, so that people are aware of what's going on in those meetings, because this happens quite often, that we have a DCC appointee on an external committee and they can go off. In fact, we had the very discussion at the Regional Transport Committee from the QLDC representative asking whether he was a representative of his council or whether he was an individual at the meeting. And so I think a lot of councils are coming to grips with how to report back to the councils. And I agree, I do believe that going as a I believe that I'm a representative of the council there, so going there I need to have a clear mandate as to what it is I'm supposed to be saying and doing. Councillor Benson-Pope.
Just following on from that, I think that reporting is entirely desirable, so thank you. But the last part you talk about, I'm assuming that all representatives of the council on whatever committee can only commit or advocate a policy line if it is the policy of council, and if that's not the case, then it has to come back here anyway. Am I correct in that assumption?
I would assume so, and then for clarity's purposes, if we were to say to take a formal position on the formation of Otago Southland Regional Transport Committee, I think that would have to come back as a resolution to be passed before I'd be able to actually speak that with that level of authority.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. This is probably a question for Mr. Drew. On the note that Councillor O'Malley has raised, that the chair was talking about, where he asked about the, funding for George Street and the potential impact that might have, if in the worst scenario that, the NZTA said we're not going to fund, what impact would that have on us money-wise? Is that something you're able to answer? I don't know.
Well, that would mean 50% of the project that we assumed would come from Waka Kotahi wouldn't be there, and so it would come back to council to make a decision on whether to proceed or wait.
Okay. And what would that increase the total value of that project to if that happened?
The total project value doesn't change, it's just NZTA doesn't fund.
Oh, I see, but it would that amount won't have been budgeted in our budgets, would it? Currently?
Within the budgets that have been through council, there is a capital number to do the project, and then there's a corresponding revenue or grant line that comes from NZTA.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
Councillor Radich.
Yes, in the interests of clarity, what is the capital value of the application to Waka Kotahi to assist with George Street?
So the FAR rate or the total project cost?
No, just the amount of money that we've asked from Waka Kotahi.
So the detailed business case is ongoing, but the capital allocation that council approved for that project is 28 million.
Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Just for clarification, when will that when will that report be due for, so that we know exactly where the fundings lie?
The detailed business case is due to be finished in late August or early September.
Okay, thank you.
Just for clarity, so the Regional Land Transport Plan was finalised last Friday, so that'll come up on the next meeting to be noted. Then goes up to the National Land Transport Plan, and that's when the funding gets allocated. The board of Waka Kotahi makes some of the final decisions. So my making that statement in the Regional Land Transport Plan was to make sure that commentary got all the way through into the formation of the National Land Transport Plan. So I don't actually anticipate that we won't get funded. It was because it sat low, I drew it forward to make sure that people were aware that it was sitting lower on that list.
So you're just trying to
Make sure, yeah. Your Worship.
Yeah, thank you. Just on that, given that that's now been signed off by the relevant committee, are we able, I wasn't anticipating significant changes were going to be made to the draft, and you've just confirmed that for me, but is there any way we can, rather than waiting for the next meeting of this committee to get them, to get the outcome, just the outcome of that would be helpful?
I'm sure Councillor Forbes at the OIC is the chair for the Otago, so we can just contact her and have it.
Great, thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, then I move. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Councillor Raddick has asked what, as I understood it, what funding had been asked for of NZTA regarding George Street. The answer came back that it's a $28 million capital value project. We know that. Is it therefore the case that we have asked that it be entirely funded by NZTA?
No.
I didn't think so.
NZTA's investment in the project will be determined during the detailed business case. So
what have we asked for of them, was the question.
We'll be asking for their normal funding assistance rate of 53%, but if we get that, is still to be determined.
Okay, so it would be 53% of the $28 million capital cost that you're talking about. Thank you. I would also like some clarification. Councillor Benson Pope has said just now that people on this committee, as I understand what he said, on Connecting Dunedin can only vote on resolutions that are in line with DCC policies and strategies. Is this the case?
Memorandum of Understanding doesn't give it any ability to make decisions in that committee. But remember, it's an officers-based committee with a governance sitting above it. It's actually the ability of officers of NZTA, DCC and ORC to work together on projects. It used to have no governance component to it at all. It was solely an operational committee, and governance is there to observe the activities of the committee. And that's how it works.
So are you confirming that in fact this committee is not actually able to make any decisions at all?
No, it has no authority to make decisions, and it's not delegated it, but it doesn't. I mean, what we are doing is observing what the staff are doing, and by that method we can then come back to ourselves and see what is going on, and we can comment to staff, but we can't. We talk to our staff here in this committee.
So you're differentiating strongly then between outcomes and decisions?
I'm wondering where you're going with your question, Councillor.
I'm just wanting to clarify what this committee is about. In reading what we have in front of us, I'm not that happy.
Mr. Chairman, it might be helpful to recirculate the terms of reference for the group.
I'm more than happy to give you the terms of reference of the committee.
Right, but the question was, under the terms and reference, is this committee able to make decisions or not?
What do you and what are you referring to? That
right, we just have outcomes here.
I've just got a point of order to deal with.
In the interest of clarity, Mr. Chairman, my question was a generic question, not just about this committee. I don't know the exact words I used, I don't have them written in front of me, but it was to the intent that I wanted to be sure that when people are representing council on whatever group, that they can advocate only a position that has been agreed around this table, and if that's not the case, then the discussion comes back to some part of this organisation for approval or discussion. That's not the debate that Councillor van der Vis is traversing at the moment.
Okay.
That was my major concern, however.
I'll uphold that, but okay.
Yeah, my major concern was that the statement that councillors, if they're on a committee, can no longer represent the public that voted for them as they understand it, but can only represent council on any group if they abide by the DCC policies and strategies. I don't believe that's the case.
I'm not really seeing where you're going to be actually, Councillor Vandervis, but I'm just... She just wanted to confirm my full rule on the point of order. I'm actually not really seeing where you're going. If you look at the minutes of that meeting, the only councillor mentioned is me, and I asked for an update on the RPTP review. The rest of it is staff. And so where are you going with your question?
Where I was going was the, not specifically here, but the overarching claim by Councillor Benson Pope, which I believe not to be correct. That is that if there are any councillors on any other group, this just being one, that if they are representing council on that group, that they can only make decisions in line with DCC policies and strategies. I don't believe that to be correct.
The reason I've put these minutes up is because these are committees that I work on, and there are others on the Connecting Dunedin committee, and that they are relevant in terms of the committees of council. This is the committee that they're most relevant to, and those minutes are being put up to very much answer the very question you've said, which is to show that if you go through these minutes, we are not doing anything, and I don't want any councillor to get a surprise by something that I say or do at a committee which doesn't reflect the council view. That's why these are up here. Now, do you see anything in these minutes that indicate that I've gone and done something that does not reflect the council's view?
No, I haven't, but that is my concern.
So, well, therefore,
but that is my concern, actually.
Well, that's why I'm putting these minutes up, to assuage those concerns, and I would encourage other members of other committees who have the appropriate external committees that have an appropriate council committee to go to lay these minutes in so these can be addressed. But to be honest, that's why these are here.
And thank you very much for that, and I look forward to the opportunity of being able to vote against A separately from B.
If you're not going to note it, that's fine.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to move them separately then. I will move that the committee notes the outcomes of a meeting of the Connecting Dunedin held on the 3rd of December 2020. All those in favour? Aye. All those against? And then I will carried. I will then note that the committee notes the minutes of the Otago Southern Regional Transport Committee dated 19th of February 2021. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Item number 9, Property Services Activity Report for the quarter ending 31st of March 2021. Mr. West and Mr. Bainbridge so far. I apologise, I was going so fast on that one, I didn't ask anyone to speak. Seemed like there'd been quite a lot of talk about it already. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Do you want to comment or just take the report as read? Do I have any questions? Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question on page 47 on paragraph 27, just around the where it says that approximately half of the applicants in the priority 1 category of the waitlist have received an offer of housing at some stage, which they have declined. Is that an offer of housing from us as DCC or generally?
Correct, yeah, from us.
And what would be the reasons for them declining?
Typically geographical. They'll be asking for a unit in a specific part of town. Sometimes the units, when they view them, are too small for them. They're not ready to make that move just yet.
Councillor Walker.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the report. Just a brief question around the 426,000 from the PGF for the building upgrades. Was that full allocation taken and used?
Yes, that's been fully received from the PGF fund and fully spent on community hall upgrades.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question on page 43. Just wanted to check the highlights community housing. The new bathrooms in the refurbishment, I'm assuming, are all accessible, are they? Because I noted that later on that's one of the issues for current residents in terms of satisfaction.
So the Palmyra site is not fully accessible because most of the units are upstairs. The bathroom changes, however, will be.
That's what I was asking about. Thank you. And my second question was, I was keen to know a bit more about item 26. So it's around the annual review of the waitlist, and I note that you were trying to understand the current circumstances of each applicant and their level of housing need, and the review led to a reduction in the number still requiring housing. What did you learn from that review in terms of more detail, the circumstances and the housing need? What would be your summary of what you learnt?
A number of people on the waiting list had found alternative housing elsewhere. And some of that was outside of Dunedin. They'll leave town and go elsewhere. Some of that was within Dunedin with other housing providers. So yeah, does that answer your question, Councillor?
Somewhat. So is there not a requirement for them to let us know if they do get other housing?
We ask them to, they don't always do that.
Right, okay, thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Just on a similar vein, on page 45, points 14 and 15, it says 1% of tenants indicated their housing did not meet their needs, primarily disability-related needs, and a lot of it's around walk-in showers rather than shower over bath. But I note on 15 that they can apply to the Ministry of Health for funding for those modifications. And I was just wondering how that process works and how we support them to get that.
The process is administered entirely by Ministry of Health.
Okay.
And we refer them to their GP, who needs to refer them to that process.
And how successful is that process in getting the outcome?
Well, it works really well.
It works really well?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Just a question around accessibility again, and I know it's not in this report, but about accessibility for new housing, should we be taking that up, which we're funded for? What is our position on accessibility in new housing?
So we're currently building new housing units, or a rebuild of existing housing units at our School Street site. Those will all be built to universal accessibility standards, and that will be the same kind of blueprint that we'll take going forward with any new builds.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Just a quick question, well, two quick questions. Paragraph 34 on page 49. Revenue for the year is slightly higher than budgeted. That's predominantly the result of leasing reviews at both Wall Street Mall and 130 Great King Street. Is that, were you budgeting on a 90% occupancy where we've got 94% showing? Is that the sort of indication?
No, that'll just be a rent review due, and we don't budget for any increase from rent reviews because we don't know where the market will be at that time, and when we've carried out those rent reviews, we've got more rent.
Well, that's a positive. And obviously shows how some of the businesses like in Wall Street are tracking in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the market's doing well.
Okay, and then when we look at paragraph 32, it talks about the Manuka Causeway project. Is that coming together? What's the time frame? And obviously because it talks about the retail space essentially being taken up when that project's finished.
Yeah, we're receiving quite a lot of interest in the vacant retail unit that will be behind where the Manuka Causeway is being installed. The project will be complete next month. It's tracking really well. There's been a delay receiving some of the tiles from overseas, but it's looking really good. I was there on Friday looking at it. It looks fantastic.
Councillor Lofisa.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair, tēnā kōrua. Thank you for your mahi. I'm following up on Councillor Al's question regarding item 15, the Ministry of Health for funding. What, are there any instances of that funding requests being declined?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
And if there was a case where it was declined, are we under any obligation to advocate or step in or assist?
We'd work with the tenant in that situation to see if we can help them.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's not in the resolution list here, and I assume it was a resolution of council, but the previous CEO had a delegation or had a opportunity to sell Wall Street Mall. There was a motion moved that we would look into the selling of that. Now, I realise it was not a go-do instantly, but I'm just wondering what the status of that and whether that's still on the radar.
I'll refer you to the chief behind you.
So, council subsequently tagged Wall Street, if you remember, as part of our endowment property portfolio, so that does change that, and that was in response to some of that work. So that isn't currently part of the work program.
So no future intention at all to sell Wall Street?
I can provide you with more detail, but not here.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Councillor van der Vis.
Again, the 900 and something units that we have, of the 900, how many people actually respond to the tenant satisfaction survey? Roughly.
Yeah, refer you to paragraph 12. So in that quarter, 87% of the tenants completed the survey.
So in order to get 1% of people to say that it doesn't meet satisfaction, that would be how many people?
So 197 tenants were surveyed, 87% completed the survey, and 1% of those said it didn't meet their needs. My maths isn't good enough on the fly to answer that. But
Okay, so it might be 2 people then?
About, yeah.
Okay. Given that the rental that we are charging for council-provided rental housing is less than half of market rates, why do you think we are still getting anyone not being satisfied with the rentals?
Yeah, I'd refer you to paragraph 14 in the report that when tenants say it doesn't meet their needs, it's typically for accessibility issues. Showers over baths is the main one.
Councillor Elder already noted that that can be got around simply by application.
There is a process for them to go through, but at this stage, if they're wherever they are in that process of potentially going through Ministry of Health and applying for funding to get that changed.
So that usually would be the one sticking point?
Usually.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Are you finding that, what sort of feedback are you getting from people who are asking if we have any vacancies on our property? Like, are we getting sort of what's the demand like? That's what I'm trying to find out. Is there a desperate need, do you think? Would you call it quite desperate or a crisis? Or is it reasonably, low demand? What would you call that?
I mean, I'd refer you to the report and paragraph 24 and the graph there with the number of people on the wait list.
Yes.
It's around that 250 mark.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's trending upwards over the last few years.
And are you hearing any of these stories of why they're needing accommodation? Like, have they been told to leave where they are, or they just can't find anywhere? Are we keeping a track of any of that? Like, to know what sort of is happening in our city around that? Do we keep any of that data?
We'll ask the tenants when they apply what their need is and why that is, and it's some of the reasons that you've mentioned. It could be landlords selling their rentals, or any number of issues that have changed their circumstances.
Right, thank you. So you haven't got a classification. You wouldn't say it's desperate or crisis.
Wouldn't want to use those emotive words. No.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. If there's no more questions, I'll move that the committee notes the Property Services Activity Report for the quarter ending 31st of March 2021, and Councillor Hawke has already indicated he will second it. Do we have anybody who wishes to speak?
Yep, just very briefly, just thanks as ever to the team for a diligent report, and thanks to the work of Mr Bainbridge so far and all his staff in Property Services. And I just want to particularly comment on the work around the 426,000 that was allocated from the PGF fund, and particularly the work that was carried out in Port Chalmers, and if it could be fed back to the staff, how well that's been received. Congratulations to the team and for all the other holes that were upgraded with that money.
Thanks very much. Any other speakers? Oh, Councillor Elder.
I just wanted to make note that the work being done around accessibility and also the ability for people who have got issues to approach the Ministry of Health about that, and the proactive work that our property is doing in that area, and also for future new housing. They are universal design standards and are accessible to people, and I think that's a great piece of work that's been done there.
Okay, if that's the end of speakers, I'll put it. All those, Councillor Gary, did you? I'll put it. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Item 10, Parks and Recreation Activity Report for the quarter ending 31st of March 2021. Mr West, Mr McLean. Welcome. Do you want any comments? Do you want to say anything, or just take it as read?
Thank you, Mr Chairman. We'll take it as read.
Very good. Questions? Councillor Lord.
Yeah, Scott, I was just intrigued. Paragraph 25, rat traps have been installed in a number of student flats throughout North Dunedin. Is that something that we're doing as part of the city sanctuary? Is that something we're just doing to get rat numbers down, or is this something you do on request, or what's the basis of that happening?
Thank you, Councillor, and through the Chair, yes, so that forms part of the City Sanctuary program, so that's part of our funding agreement we have with Predator Free Dunedin, is to roll these out through pilot suburbs, and that's one of the target species.
So is it that you're going to do a certain area and just find out what the residual trap catch is, or do you just put traps out at certain flats, or how's it actually working?
Through the Chair, we offer them to all flats, so it's really just depending on, in that particular suburb, and it's dependent on the uptake. So it's as much social science as anything else to inform future predator programs in urban areas. Yep.
And if I may, a final question, do you have any indications of how well they're working, whether they're getting many rats?
Through the Chair, we don't have the trap catch data yet, so that's only just been rolled out this quarter that's been reported on.
If I can follow that up though, will you be taking the catch data?
Yes. Yep.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Mr McLean, in item 23, it mentions the marine asset improvements, replacement and refurbishment of some of the pontoons around the harbour edge. Can you tell me what is the plan going forward for that kind of work? Is there an overall plan for our part in that work?
Thank you, Councillor, and through the Chair. Our renewals are driven through our asset management program, so that's for existing marine assets and other recreational assets. In terms of any future works that's not related to renewals, we'll be commencing the harbour plan, recreational plan. I note that the Otago Regional Council have signalled that they are going to be doing similar things, so we'll be working really closely with them and other stakeholders, so that will inform future decisions around levels of provision for marine assets.
And in terms of the work done thus far, there was quite a lot to do in terms of those harbour edge assets, I'm assuming. Do you feel, no, feel isn't the right word, has there been quite a lot of progress made in terms of the facilities and the assets that work's been done on so far? Or is there still, I mean, I know there's still a lot to go, but what would be your comment on the progress?
So we're progressing really well. It's had condition assessment reports done on most of our assets, and that's continuing. So we've started with the assets in most need of repair and refurbishment, and we're steadily working our way through those.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and thanks for the report. Notice under the aquatic section, there's no mention of the Port Chalmers pool, and having cycled and driven past it recently, it looks like a bomb's hit it. What's going on there?
Councillor, I don't believe a bomb's hit it. So we're undertaking a full reclad of the pool.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Paragraphs 9 and 10 around freedom camping. Is there any monitoring of the freedom camping around the city at the moment, or is it all finished?
Through the Chair, we had our ranger program running, so that'll be curtailed. Yes, so that's finished now.
Okay,
Yep.
so vehicles that are appearing to be non-self-contained parking at Thomas Burns through these months, are they permitted? Are they parking there illegally? Are there any infringement notices being issued to them? How has that been handled?
So no, there's still, the bylaw applies year-round, councillor. So if there are issues with those vehicles, public can still contact the infringement team, and they'll go out and visit it. But it won't be at the same level as we have over the summer period, where we've got rangers and actual security working purely on that. So
residents can still follow through the 4774,000 number, and action will be taken accordingly.
Yep.
Thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. With the Mosgiel pool, there's been some comments around the safety of where it's proposed to turn into the pool. Is that DCC or is that NZTA that we need to raise that issue with?
So the Parks team and the project management of the new Mosgiel pool. It's working. Sorry. The project management and the Parks team are working really closely with our Transport Department and NZTA on that. So they've been working alongside all through that project.
Okay, so if there's a concern, so we go to the pool project, is that we...
Well, if it's a road traffic issue or related to that particular project, we've already made it clear to the community, and we'll continue to have that ongoing dialogue right through the process and the project now. The community can come in, whether it comes in through transport or through parks or the project management, and it'll be followed up accordingly.
Okay, yes, because it's quite where they turn is proposed at the moment, very close to the bridge. And there's a concern that if you're coming over the bridge, you might not see, see the car. Right, yeah. So one more question. If someone has a rat, finds a rat in the house, can they ring the council and get them to come out and kill the rat?
Through the Chair, no, not entirely. So the City Sanctuary program has priority suburbs and pilot suburbs, so they're quite well defined.
Anywhere in West Harbour? Thank you.
Councillor Radich.
Just going back to the Port Chalmers pool, I was curious, is there going to be an upgrade of the insulative properties of the cladding? The wall and ceiling insulation?
Through the Chair, no, it's just a straight re-roof and reclad of the clear light type material that was there. So it's a much improved product, but yeah.
The reason why I asked, last time I swam there, it was pretty cold. And so is there any plan to increase the insulation of the pool at all, ever?
Through the Chair, that we have nothing in the draft budget, 10-year budget, but we are undertaking the strategic review, so that will inform future investment decisions right across the whole network.
If I can just follow that up, that's point 17 is the aquatic network review. I assume that when that review is, will that review, when it's over, lead to a looking at the strategy in general? We had comments, well, we had an item in the 10-year plan with the school pool that needed work that Ministry of Education was not funding. So when this aquatic network review is completed, will there be an activity that comes in behind, which is to establish a strategy so that we can determine things like the quality of the community pools and the roles that school pools will play?
That is my aim, Councillor, that we have a citywide plan moving forward for all of our aquatics facilities. And just to remind Council that the Ministry of Education will be sitting in on that working group, so that they are joined right from the beginning.
Thank you. Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Further question about the city sanctuary paragraph. Do you have enough funding in current budgets and future budgets to keep up a meaningful level of support for predator-free?
Through the Chair, so we have the predator-free funding, and that's for a further 2 years from the end of this financial year. Predator-free Dunedin, of which we're one of the delivery partners, are working with Predator-free 2050 Limited on future funding opportunities.
But in the immediate future, 2 years, there's enough funding to keep up the momentum that's been created?
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Fiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair. Tēnā korua. My questions relate to the Te Rauone section of the report on page 57. Just curious, how long does it take for a wildlife permit to be issued? Is it quite a quick process?
Through the Chair, it took several months. So it's
okay.
Processed by Department of Conservation. I believe this one was processed in Hamilton.
And secondly, about how many lizards are involved?
Through the Chair, I don't have that level of detail, but happy to find that out and circulate that if you wish.
Councillor Hurleham.
Thank you. Since Councillor Benson-Pope raised the budget, a question around budget, I wondered, do you have any concerns about the budget for Parks and Rec? Because my question is, I'm asking that question because I know myself, and a couple of other people have also raised it to me, where things have been donated to Parks and Rec, and then Parks and Rec have said they haven't got enough money to, do the upkeep of those things, even though they're getting given them. So is that still going to be the case, that budgets are very, very tight?
So we have put the draft budget through the long-term plan for the Parks and Rec programme of work for the next 10 years, which Council have approved. So on that basis, yes, for the programme of work that we've put forward, yes.
Does that mean that budgets are a little bit better?
It means that we believe we have enough money in the 10-year plan long-term budget to do the work that we need to do over the next 10 years.
Okay, so if we get additional work, like for example, in Mosgiel we've got a new group set up for the Memorial Gardens and they've got ideas for some things. Is there room in our budget for things like that or not really?
So I guess when we get work requests that are outside of the work programme, there's a discussion within the department that Mr McLean has with any stakeholders if required, and with the team to look at whether we want to reprioritise that to be able to fit that in. But also have the opportunity, I guess, if need be, that it can come to a future annual plan or long-term plan process.
Okay, so if some things are donated, like plants have been donated in the past, and for example, water fountains, is there any leeway in the budget for that sort of thing, or?
I think that the question of ongoing operational costs with regard to donated assets are something that we're more aware of than we were a few years ago, and aware of what that impact might have if we take on a lot of additional assets.
Yes. So that answer is no?
The answer is we would consider it as part of prioritisation of work and costs and work programme like anything else.
Councillor Elder.
Freedom Camping, through the chair. Freedom Camping 9 and 10, camper numbers are down 48% for the period. Does that indicate that, you know, around 50% of Freedom campers are actually domestic campers? Or quite a high percentage are?
It's quite a difficult question. This season would be predominantly domestic, so we do gather that data through the interviews with the rangers, so we'd have to wait until we get that data back to analyse the nationality of this season's campers.
Okay, and the infringement notices were down 64%, and camping-related complaints down 70%. What do you think were the main reductions in those complaints and infringements?
Through the chair, so that data is being analysed at the moment, and
okay.
I'll circulate that report separately, but happy to bring back to this committee.
Thank you. And another question was just about the city sanctuary work and pest control, and whether in fact you've had feedback around anecdotally or otherwise an increase in the number of native birds in those areas?
Through the chair, I don't have that information to hand, but I'll talk to our city sanctuary team and provide you feedback.
Cool, thank you.
But there is a bird count monitoring activity as in point 28. Then I'm happy to move that the committee notes the Parks and Recreation Activity Report for the quarter ending 31st March 2021. Councillor Fiso seconded. Anybody want to speak? I just want to make two comments. When we, Councillor Houlihan's commentary around budgets and other such thing is a good reminder to us that as community groups want to do things, have to get themselves in lined up for what will now be the next long-term plan. So we've got all that well lined up. And to Councillor Elder's commentary or question around New Zealanders being freedom campers, they are the third largest group. Even before when the border was open, they were the third largest group of freedom campers. So it wouldn't be surprising that that number is, given that people can't go overseas, also gone up. So it probably is about right. Any more comments? Okay, I put it. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item 11, Three Waters Activity Report for the quarter ending 31st of March 2021. Mr Drew and Mr Dyer. Sorry. Looks like everybody's done their movement. Okay, Mr Dyer, you want to comment on this, or you just have to?
No, nothing to add. Just take questions.
Okay, any questions? Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Just on paragraph 31, it talks about the Wakaiti pipeline renewals. I just wonder when the drinking water might be available again to people in Wakaiti, etc.
So we're working through that with Public Health South at the moment. The pipeline has largely been replaced. We're still confirming the accuracy of the lead monitor that we installed in late April, and we've got a couple of other tasks to undertake, including an investigation report and clear findings. That's with Public Health South for feedback at the moment, but we're still tracking towards the end of June at this stage.
Thank you. And there is at a Public Health South announcement when the water is able to be drunk again?
Would be something that we would undertake, but with buy-in from Public Health South and support on public health messaging.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr Dyer, for such a comprehensive report, sort of topical after the public forum, which you may or may not have heard. But my question's about the reference you make to some exceedances at various beach monitoring sites. I mean, you mention in the report the comprehensive nature of our operation. Everyone knows about Tahuna, but fewer people know about Green Island or Warrington or Waikawaiti, and you talk about the other plant work that is planned. But I want to ask about monitoring. Clearly you monitor, or someone monitors on your behalf, the water quality at the two main outfalls, and that's referred to on that comment about the beach sites in paragraph 27.
Yes.
But what about the monitoring? I assume Warrington has an outfall to the ocean?
No, it doesn't. We have a land discharge
So
field.
there's no discharge in that area?
There's a discharge to the sand dunes.
Right.
It's an irrigated area.
Great. Is there any water monitoring, for example, in areas like Blueskin Bay that we are responsible for, or is that entirely the purview of the ORC?
We are responsible for some monitoring in that area, not in Blueskin Bay itself, but there's a number of bore sites around the disposal field where we monitor the effect of our discharge on that environment.
Great, but our responsibilities stop essentially in the proximity of our outfalls to, I guess, check their compliance.
Yeah, that's broadly correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Radich.
Just further to that question, the nitrogen levels from Warrington, you note, cannot be met. But given that we're discharging into sand dunes, do those nitrogen levels have any effect at all?
There have been several studies undertaken on the effect of that, and I don't have those to hand right at the moment. Broadly, through discussion with the ORC, it's acknowledged that the nitrogen limit for that particular plant is quite stringent, and we've stayed in regular dialogue with them around effects, and so far we're tracking toward. We have worked on a strategy that is we'll look to address that as we move towards a new consent application, which is not very far away.
Right, thank you. The Waikawaiti water, so the pipeline is just about complete, and then at that stage the water will be the same as the water previous to the incident, the lead incident. Is that correct? So what I mean by that is at Waikawaiti there were quite a few complaints about the water. So in terms of the taste and odour from the water, so
yeah.
in terms of their perception of quality of the water, so will it be in the same condition as before?
The pipeline replacement will likely benefit the water quality in a localised area of Waikawaiti, but the taste and odour complaints you're talking about, they relate to the river source and treatment plant, and there's a project that's underway to look at renewing those assets, which should have a benefit in terms of those parameters.
Yes, on item 32, there's a plant, the plant upgrade. When is that expected to be completed?
So we're in a kind of broad design planning phase at the moment, and that'll move through to some procurement likely later in this calendar year, and then we should expect to see works occurring and largely complete towards around this time next year, if not a little bit later.
Wonderful, thank you.
I'd like to follow up from Councillor Radich's question just then on the Waikawaiti water treatment plant, because I note there that it also includes surveying, land procurement and ecological assessment. Given the changing environment with the water services bill specifically, and a lot of commentary and emphasis on extraction points, does that work now sit in line with where we think the future legal environment may put us and regulatory environment?
That is a difficult question to answer. The changing parameters in the national landscape at the moment are quite, with regard to this project, are quite slow moving. It is likely that if any of those parameters were to mean that we needed to make a change to this project, it's likely that change might take 4 or 5 years to undertake, and to then get benefits for the community in Waikawaiti. So we've got a bit of a phasing problem at the moment. We could look at this, look at the situation we're in, and assume that there will be material impacts of, that the drinking water legislative change and other things will have a material impact on this project, and we'll need to do further work in the near term. But that might be a faulty assumption as well. If we were to do that and to stop this project, then it would mean that the community would be facing the same sort of taste and odour complaints over a reasonably lengthy period of time. But it is also possible that that those changes in the national environment and national standards and all that sort of thing might lead us towards a pipeline from town or other things in the future, but that would likely be a little bit further out. At this stage, we think it's still the right thing to do to continue with replacing this treatment plant, but we've got a decent period of time to, I guess, look at all of the assumptions that we've made around reform and wait for new drinking water standards to arrive to be able to make an educated decision around whether or not that replacement of that plant is the right thing to do and in what form. It is one of the reasons we're still in a planning phase at the moment, we're trying to make assumptions and digest all of the information that's coming at us from Taumata Arawai and other parties.
Thanks. I think that was a very extensive answer. So in a shorter version of that, the plan is to go ahead because this was actually funded long before the Water Services Bill was passed. But now that the Water Services Bill is passed and the other thing we see coming forward, there will be a small, at least a pause of some sort to look at this investment and to see whether or not it's fully appropriate or whether we may go back to the community with another version.
Yeah, correct.
Thank you. Councillor Lefiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. Tēnā koe, Mr. Dyer. Thank you. My question relates to item 33, wastewater treatment plants renewals, and forgive me for my lack of concentration, possibly you've updated us about this, but does this include the Green Island plant?
Yeah, there's work at both Tahuna and Green Island in this particular project.
And with respect to Kaikorai 4, are we waiting for the Green Island to be fixed or upgraded so that Kaikorai 4 proceeds, or?
So there's a few projects to stitch together at the moment, and a lot of the treatment plant renewals at the moment are we're focusing on assets that don't necessarily have scope to increase capacity and to undertake that work. We've got a whole bunch of monitoring work occurring across the city at the moment as a part of a hydraulic model development, and that will help to confirm or not the effectiveness of all of the projects we've laid out at the moment.
And my final question is, the external project manager, is that person local?
Yes, it is.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, and it was good to hear the Greater South Dunedin Action Group saying that the report vindicated some of your work that's been done. My question actually is just related to South Dunedin, and I note there's no mention of the planning around what we're doing in that space, and even in next steps it's not there, and I was just wondering where that is at and what is happening around the stormwater and wastewater system related to South Dunedin flooding.
So typically in these reports we focus on the physical construction bits, and that project is not yet at that stage. However, we've started to undertake modelling work and are likely to see outputs by the end of the year, early next, and then to be able to start to undertake further optioneering and design work in South Dunedin.
So just to clarify, that report will be sort of coming up towards the end of the year, sort of?
Likely early next. Yeah.
Early next. And who are you working with on that?
As a consortium of consultants in that field, but progress has been reasonably slow to date, but should ramp up in the near term.
Cool, thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Dyer. In item 13, it talks about the contractor having difficulty recruiting new staff, or the ability to, and this lines up with what I'm hearing in the community about difficulty getting good staff. By that, I think people are meaning reliable staff, capable staff. Is that situation improved, or is that still an issue?
Recruitment and retention for our contractors has been a bit of a perennial issue, and has been reasonably long lasting. In this case, we were seeing a short, sharp, reasonably acute level of pain for the contractor. They've had a number of people leave. And so just going through a recruitment cycle at the moment. We do, every now and then, this happens, and we'd expect it to start to come right in the near term.
Thank you for that answer. My second question is around next steps in item 41. A lot of people in the community would be surprised to learn that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that there's New Zealand standards for tapware, but they're not mandatory. And I wonder if this was signalled by the Ministry of Health as something that would be reviewed. Do you have any timing on that particular item?
No, I don't at this stage in terms of that national standards review.
And how important is that in terms of lead in water generally across our water system, because some of the old tapware has a high lead content?
Yeah, it's quite important. Quite important in our investigation, and Waikawiti is showing that. Certainly something that we'll be working on, making sure that the messaging for our community is reasonably clear in the near term.
Thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, Tom, I'd just like to go back to that point 27, and it's about the exceedances of the nitrogen levels, and it's saying that the wastewater plant, well, as my understanding, it's saying it's an ongoing breach and the plant simply cannot meet the consent conditions. Do the regional council have a view on this other than, like, obviously there's no prosecutions involved, so they obviously, is this something we report to them?
Yeah, that's correct.
And is it, I didn't quite pick up your answer in response to Councillor Raddick's question, but were you suggesting that that we are applying for a new consent, or and at that stage is it hope that you'll get the restrictions lifted so they're not quite as hard to meet?
Yes, I think that consent's due in the mid-2020s, so it's due to expire in mid-2020s, and at that time, or before that, we'll be going through a process with the ORC to work, and other stakeholders and partners, to look at how that plant operates, what an appropriate consent with modern standards might look like, and then therefore what work might need to be done to meet that consent. And so we'll be undertaking that over the next few years.
So that's definitely not so it's not a case of we're looking for more permissive consent conditions. We will be fixing the problem.
Yes, not necessarily the case.
Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Back to the question that was asked a wee while ago around Three Waters reform. Would you say that at the moment, because there's so much uncertainty around it, that it's slowing down how we can progress forward with the Waikawiti work? Or is that a bit unfair to say?
It's probably it is providing some uncertainty, but it isn't necessarily turning our timeframes upside down. So I think we can likely continue the work as planned, but we still need to validate some of that.
I mean, I know the answer, I'm sure the answer will be yes to this, but on this list for our next steps, we've got the Waikawiti reticulation in the middle of that list. For people who live out there and might see that, are you able to confirm that this is still an urgent matter that we have at the top of our list, to take priority?
Absolutely, it consumes a significant portion of our time at the moment.
Thanks, Tom, for your work.
Councillor Van Der Wes.
Councillor Lord asked my question and I got most of the answer there. I did have one other question regarding the nitrogen limit at Warrington. Is this because of the large number of septic tank systems there, or is it farming, or have you not?
So the nitrogen number that's quoted in the report relates to the discharge from the treatment plant.
Yes.
So we have a limit in terms of the quantity of nitrogen on that treatment plant, and at the moment we are exceeding that, and in fact have exceeded that since that plant's been in service. So it's unfair to say that it's from any septic tank. So it's that number is related to any septic tanks or farming generally. Although,
but they must be the inputs in the first place, surely. The reason?
No. So the number we monitor is from the outflow of the wastewater treatment plant, which only comes from domestic connections in the Warrington Township.
Okay, so what you're saying is that it's not farming nitrogen that actually is getting into that system at all?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Radich.
Yes, I think it's highly commendable what's happened in Edinburgh Street and Waikawaiti, rapid response to a problem there. And the laying of that pipeline down Edinburgh Street has gone very swiftly, very efficiently. I'm worried about another project happening in another part of town which is not mentioned in this, and I know that Three Waters is not. They're only partially responsible, or partially running that project. And what I'm talking about is the Forbury Street Kidney Roundabout, which appears to be taking an awful long time and a great detriment to the businesses around that area. So my question is there anything that can be done to expedite the completion of that work? Because they certainly are feeling the effects of the time it's taking.
Yeah, I can answer that one. So Forbury was a little bit different to Edinburgh Street. It's very complex. It was a 5 metre deep excavation and running sands. So we're not comparing apples with apples. Edinburgh Street was down a quiet road. So we do understand the pressure that's had on the businesses around Forbury Road intersection. We have a member of the economic development team working with some of those businesses, and the teams are working 50 plus hour weeks to get that job done as quickly as possible. The first closure was required because the pipes are in the middle of the intersection 5 metres down. The second closure is trying to accelerate those works to get them done as quickly as possible so we can leave the area.
Wonderful, thank you. And another question, last question, number 39, the St Kilda Coastal Plan. I see there's 2,000 individuals provided feedback. Included in that feedback, was it noted the petition calling for the restoration of the groin of 2,500 petitioners? Sorry? What was there, amongst those feedbacks received to the plan, was it noted a petition of 2,500 petitioners calling for the reinstatement of the St Clair groin?
Yes, it was. Quite how that's been counted, I'm not too sure though. However, that petition and a number of other bits of feedback have all been taken into account in developing that plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've just got, it's actually point 33, which is the wastewater treatment plants renewals. And then you've got point 27, which is Warrington with excessive nitrogen discharges, and then point 37. I assume point 37 was Seacliff treatment plant upgrade. That's a wastewater treatment plant as well?
Yes, correct.
And are they all carried in that point number 33? Are they all part of the bigger process, or is that just Tahuna and Green Island, which you sort of alluded to at the time?
Yeah, Tahuna, Green Island and Mosgiel, it's a reasonably focused piece of work to upgrade and repair and maintain a whole bunch of mechanical and electrical assets in those plants. Okay,
so Warrington then is as is, and it's going to come up for renewal in the future, but what are we facing in the future with that then? Because it probably won't meet standards by then, will it?
Yeah, there's certainly
Well,
certainly
I don't
some
want to
uncertainty.
preempt the application, but... yeah.
There's some uncertainty in that space. However, like any consenting process, we'll go through an early consent study phase and then move into a phase of stakeholder engagement with some facts and some information, and then work through to an outcome in terms of a resource consent with the Regional Council.
Any more questions? Welcome, Councillor Hall. If there are no more questions, then I move that the committee notes the Three Waters activity report for the quarter ending 31st of March 2021. Seconder, Councillor Barker. Does anybody want to comment? I'm just going to have one very quick statement, and that is that the Water Services Bill is not it's the first part of Three Waters reform, but it really is talking about abstraction points. It's where you draw your water from, and Te Mana o Te Wai, the mana of the water itself. And I envisage that will actually mean that in some of our water treatment plants, we may find ourselves having to comply with a law that might mean that we're going to have to modify things in that regard. And then as we go forward with looking at our wastewater treatment plants, I'm pretty sure that we're going to have to be increasing our standards as things go along. So this is definitely, when you think about the submission of public forum today, Three Waters is probably the biggest challenge that the city's facing at the moment, and I commend the Three Waters team for what they're doing right now, and they've got a lot of work ahead of them to continue. Any other speakers? If that's not, then I'll put it. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item number 12, Waste and Environmental Solutions Activity Report for the quarter ending 31st of March 2021. Mr. Drew and Mr. Henderson. Welcome, Mr. Henderson. Do you want to say anything about your report, or just take it as read? Okay, I've got Councillor Walker and then Councillor Barker.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, for the report. A couple of questions, one around point 20 and one around point 22. In terms of the polystyrene recycling, good to see that 165 square metres has already been collected. The question is, in terms of Expo being an economically viable option, what is the cubic metre requirement? Is there one? And
no, there isn't one as such. Basically, the arrangement we have with Expo is there, as they're delivering to Dunedin the installation products, they're basically just backfilling the truck. So we are using our waste minimisation funding to pay for that the transport back. So it's a win for them. They don't have to pay for an empty truck to come back. They've got a backload of polystyrene. We're paying for it, and then they recycle it. So it's a win-win, basically.
Okay, so it sounds too perfect. Thank you. Great initiative. And number 22, really excited to see this. Anything that's internally reducing our waste is great. Can I just, so two things, just clarifying, is the system, it's not one of those rolly things, it's actually like a posh hotel? Yeah? Is that the system?
No, it's the original roller towel type of effort, yep.
Gosh, I thought we were going very posh there. And in terms of the cost of that, is it cost neutral or negative, positive?
I can't actually give you, that off the top of my head, I'm afraid, sorry. I know, but again, the cost of waste disposal was taken into account, and when that was taken into account, it was actually a win, but the actual cost comparison for the roller towel servicing versus the paper towels, but there was quite a win on the waste disposal costs for the council.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question, first of all, on paragraph 11, which was around the increase of 15.6% on contamination in the rubbish, and I just wondered what actions can and will the council take to address this. Do you know why it's happening and how we can solve that?
A lot of that contamination, as I made a note in there with regards to the paragraph 10 in regards to obviously the changes to the acceptance criteria. So a lot of that extra contamination is pretty much stuff that we used to accept that we don't accept any longer. We've just completed and it's mentioned here, the education campaign, the actual bin audit checking. So that's basically our education campaign at the gate. Of course, we can't get to everybody's bin at the same time. It's a huge undertaking, but we have had media, social media, radio advertising. We're doing 12-week programs of the bin audits, and we've just started now on the blue bins as well, because we can no longer accept lids in the blue bins. So it's just an ongoing education campaign.
So when you're talking about contamination, it's really about putting the wrong plastics in the wrong thing?
It's wrong plastics, but also it's if the plastic's dirty. Things like that. If things that it might be the right plastic, but if it hasn't been like a meat tray that hasn't been washed, is contamination.
And my next question is around the waste, or next few questions, I guess, around the waste minimisation and management plan. I was just wondering, there's 12 performance measures in there, and will they get reported annually, and will they come to this committee?
The new, I haven't actually confirmed that the new 10-year plan performance indicators were actually adopted. I have forgotten to check on that. But the 3 targets in there were proposed to be new performance measures for the group, which would then become part of the quarterly and annual reporting.
Okay, just on page 28 of the waste minimisation plan, it has 12 performance indicators here, so I just wondered if they were going to feed back through to the report.
Sorry, no. So the performance indicators were not going to be reported on. It's actually the targets of the WMP, which are there's the 3 main targets for waste reduction.
Okay. We passed it, I guess. The next question I had was around the combined community composting and sustainable living workshops, etc. There's actually a performance indicator on there. So this doesn't have any numbers in it. It says was well attended, and I just wonder if you're keeping lists of all of the numbers that are attending these, because part of the performance indicator is that this grows.
Yeah, we do keep numbers on those, and we keep numbers. We follow up on the attendees on how well they've gone, but it's not actually something that we report back up to this committee. It's basically just something that we are reporting to ourselves.
So I'm just wondering about the connection between the waste minimisation and management plan and how that's reported on. I'm obviously not understanding what the performance indicators and I know there's 3 targets in here, but there's a whole lot of performance indicators, and then obviously with the numbers of people attending workshops, etc. So I'm just wondering how we're tracking those to see that we're achieving this.
So we're tracking those internally. So for argument's sake, the paragraph 11, the performance measure that you measured there, that's the only 10-year plan performance measure historically that my department has had. Is just for an increase, so that's the only one that gets reported back up. The others are measured internally in the department. Going forward, we've put in the targets from the WMP also, so that those would be reported up to this level, but the other supporting targets, for want of a better word, are just reported on internally and within the group.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for the report. There was just one question I wanted to, or 2 actually. The first one I wanted to follow up on Councillor Walker's comment about the changing from paper towels, and you were saying just that alone should drop the civic centre's carbon footprint by 36%. Surely that can't be correct.
36%, or is it 36 tonnes? Just remember which one.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, waste
yeah,
footprint.
it's the waste footprint, yeah.
Okay, yep. Okay, I was going to say, surely we're worrying about nothing if that's the case.
So it's a very lightweight but a large volume.
Oh, yeah, okay, yep. I'd be sticking it in the fireplace. But the other question I just had was and I realise it's got nothing to do with us, but the tip at Abbotsford that's sitting on the side of the hill, and it's sort of quite an obvious scar. It's private or it's not council, but is that controlled by similar regulations to, say, Green Island on the other side of the road?
They're similar. obviously it has to operate within a consent from the Otago Regional Council, and it has many similar conditions to Green Island has. However, that private landfill doesn't take municipal waste, it doesn't take household waste, so it has a lower operational regime, for want of a good description. It doesn't have to meet quite the same standards that we do.
Now, will that also, do you know if that'll be engineering, there'll be an engineer component to how that's been put together? I just look, it's getting awfully close to the sort of where we had a slip 30 or 40 years ago, and I'm just wondering if that's, if someone's aware of that.
Well, yeah, I can't confirm exactly, but as part of any consenting process for a landfill, there must have been an engineering component and an operational plan for the landfill.
Okay, thank you.
But just to follow up from Councillor Lord's question, it's the ORC that consents those, not the DCC, right?
Yes, correct, yeah.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Henderson, two questions around the university area and waste. My first one is during the 10-year plan, we had a lot of submissions that suggested people believed we were paying for the additional collections there. I wonder if you could clarify who in fact was supporting those extra collections.
Yeah, there's historically confusion around who supplies what in that area. So they have ceased now, but the university used to provide skips for the students at particular times of the year. They have now stopped providing those skips, and on the presentation of a student ID card you can get free disposal at Wycliffe Street transfer station. However, at certain times of the year we do extra collections, our normal curbside collection, we do extra based around certain times of the year when students are coming and going.
And thank you for that really clear answer. And my second question is the various, for example, glass recycling in the tertiary precinct that's mentioned, and the 2 additional glass bin containers. How far are these initiatives going towards the goals of the Sophia Charter in that regard?
I probably couldn't give you a really good answer on that. I mean, there's probably still a way to go. The area, we still get obviously a number of complaints about rubbish and especially broken glass in that area, so we have some way to go.
Going some way, but some way to go. Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Radich.
I'm curious about Wycliffe Street. How is the free transfer at Wycliffe Street funded?
So Wycliffe Street Transfer Station is owned and operated by Waste Management, who have the contract for the University of Otago. So they have the waste disposal contract for the university, and so there's a deal in place as part of that contract.
Right, that's fine. And I was curious about lids, because there's a bit of consternation amongst some people have voiced to me about lids. So what do you mean by lids? You've got no lids going into the blue bin and no lids going into the plastic recycling bins either. So neither lids for glass jars, metal lids, or wine bottle screw cap lids, or plastic lids for plastic bottles of juice or anything. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. So in the case of the plastic, lids tend to be too light, even if they're actually screwed onto the bottle. When the recycling goes into the truck at curbside, it's crushed to make room in the truck, and all the lids pop off. Therefore, when the truck dumps at the transfer station, the lids are on the belt, and the way we separate paper is using air jets and light. If the plastic is too light, it just ends up getting blown into the paper and the cardboard, and it counts as contamination. In the case of glass, with the lids in there, it didn't used to be too much of a problem, but Visi, who have now taken over the OI glass furnace up in Auckland, they are cracking down on contamination, and if they decide that a load is too contaminated, we have to pay to bring the load back to Dunedin from Auckland. So we obviously do not want that to happen, so we can't take the lids.
And so how do they cope with the aluminium bands around the top of a wine bottle that is still in place even if the lid itself is
So in most cases, the furnace can actually handle it. Obviously, there is contamination when stuff goes into the furnace. They're trying to limit the amount of contamination that they're having to deal with. And it's their furnace.
Yes, and similarly, metal lids for glass jars, same.
Yeah, they also normally, they quite often have plastic as well on the inside as a seal, so that's another issue. But yeah, it's their criteria for their furnace, and we just have to play along.
So people have talked to me about collecting up the lids. What could they possibly do with the lids other than landfill? Is there anything?
I'm not actually sure. I do know there has been a couple of, and I can't actually remember what they were off the top of my head at this point in time, but there have been a couple of initiatives with, the one that comes to mind is like the plastic tags off bread bags and that kind of stuff. There have been a few initiatives, but they're not constant. They're a stop-start sort of a thing. And I guess with metal, aluminium caps for bottles, that kind of thing, I guess if you could get enough of them, then they will be worth money for Sims Metals, the metal recyclers, but you need a massive volume to make it worthwhile.
Thank you.
Your Worship. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. There was originally, quite a while ago, a promotion around always putting the lids on the milk bottles, you know, the big plastic bottles when you put them in the recycle bin. And then there was a one around jars, putting your lids on. So a lot of people will think they're doing the right thing by doing that. How extensively have we promoted that, you know, don't do that? Sort of like, have we really put out a big promotion on that, or are we planning to do more?
It's ongoing. We did a big education campaign when we changed the criteria last year. It's been ongoing. There's been media, etc., ever since, basically. And now we're starting to get into, as I say, there will actually be education material for the blue bins, and that's also going to include basically a thanks for your great recycling, or here's what you're doing wrong, and in the worst case, it'll basically be we're no longer going to take your bin.
How high is their tolerance threshold for, you know, the odd lid? Like, are they going to turn it back from Auckland over to a couple of lids, or like how high does it have to be?
We almost had one turned back because of a couple of broken ceramic cups, so they're getting very strict.
Oh, gosh. What would that cost us if we had to send that back and pay for it to come back?
At the moment, transport's quite expensive, so it can't be accurate, but it's quite a few $1,000s to get a container from here to Auckland.
Gosh, thank you.
Any more questions? I have a couple. Number 18, the Hawk and Hurl was declared successful. What's the definition of a success? It's got to me, it's got hurl in the name, which implies that how much is diverted, how much is just going into a skip? I don't know anything about that. I've never seen any numbers come back from a Hawk and Hurl.
That's because we consider them successful, but basically it's normally we do them in partnership with like a Lions Club or something like that. So it's basically if the Lions Club collect material that would have been going in the bin, and they have collected enough to actually make some form of donation out of it, then we consider it to be successful if it's actually achieved that target. There's no measurement as such of the material that a community organisation is diverting. We just know that the residual waste that we are getting is reduced.
It's based on the Hawk component of it. Someone brings something and then it's sold, and then how much money is generated is the metric.
Yeah, basically, it may not be sold. It may just be that instead of it going into the skip, any metal is actually taken out and given to the Lions Club for them to sell for scrap.
But we don't, at the moment, there's no actual hard metrics on what's going on in this. No. Okay. And I just want to follow up from point 10 and I think 11 as well. It's the contamination stuff again. And then point 26, which is phase 4 of the waste plan. we have in our WMMP the requirement to develop local capacity and to assist in the formation of local capacity, and we're seeing, as you just said, that the Auckland glass recycling company is also now putting more stringency upon us. To what extent what are we doing about all of this? Are we just saying it's getting harder and we're rejecting more and more and going to landfill, or are we going to develop, what mechanisms are we doing to develop local capacity so we aren't rejecting stuff?
Well, there's a couple of things sort of in there. It's one, obviously, we're proposing a new material recovery facility as part of the 10-year plan, so that would be a modern facility as opposed to the one we have now, which is quite dated, over a decade old. So that would include optical sorters and things like that to actually enable far better sorting of material on the belts. There's also, we're looking at alternative options with the likes of Fulton Hogan, if we have, and it may be something applicable to the university area. We haven't worked through the details, but in some cases you can actually just, of course, take glass, crush it and use it as roading aggregate and material like that in a local way. So that's one option that we could be looking at for the likes of glass, etc.
We wouldn't look at a glass furnace or anything like that, or what's off the table and what's on the table, I guess, would be my question.
No, we haven't done any work on looking at there's the one glass furnace in Auckland at the moment. There's two furnaces, both operated by the one organisation, and that's sufficient to handle all of New Zealand's recycled glass.
If they accept it. True. Any more questions? Councillor Houlihan.
Is it possible that if you can pinpoint what property has left lids on or contaminated the thing, that they could be charged for it to be flown back from Auckland?
No, we wouldn't have any way of identifying that accurately, I'm
right,
afraid.
okay.
Our solution to that is to try and identify those properties and not collect from those properties if they refuse to clean up their act.
Oh, I see, right. So because there's been a change, I think, is it fair to say, in what will now be accepted for recycling and so there's some things that have been taken off the list, is that right? That's my understanding of it.
Yeah, correct. Basically, we only collecting plastics 1, 2 and 5 now, obviously, so the other ones 3, 4, 6 and 7 have dropped out. So 1, 2 and 5, there is capacity in New Zealand to recycle that plastic, and that capacity is growing. And the other part of that is government legislation to try and force manufacturers to use recyclable plastic, and also consumer behaviour, trying to ask people not to buy stuff that is in the rubbish plastic.
Right, yes. So what will people do with that, so they just send that to the landfill, do they? Is that what they do with that? That can't be recycled, that just goes straight to the landfill?
Yeah, at the moment it is. Obviously we'd prefer if people didn't buy anything that had that material in it. Right. And obviously there is legislation underway, changes to the Waste Minimisation Act. I don't have a time frame, but it is basically to not outlaw, but to encourage the use of recyclable plastic as opposed to the plastic that has no value.
Is there any way we can highlight the ones that we don't do somehow? That obviously we'd have to meet with the supermarkets and those sort of organisations, because I'm a label reader, but sometimes I really struggle to see the recycle numbers on things, and it's often not clear. Is there any way around that?
So part of that work that's going on at the moment is actually trying to also standardise the recycling symbol, because basically at the moment you can pretty much put a recycling symbol on anything if you want to.
Right.
But it's actually trying to standardise that and legislate it so that people can identify what is and isn't recyclable much easier, and also make it clear what class of plastic it is, because at the moment, as you'd be aware, some of it is very hard to read.
Yes, it is.
So there's work underway to try and make that system much more comprehensive.
Yes, I mean, I consciously buy things that can be recycled or that are green or friendly to the environment, but you can't
Councillor.
always tell that it is, so we need to, that's sort of quite urgent then, isn't it, to try and highlight what isn't.
Councillor, that's more like, that would be great in this, when I ask who wants to speak on the item.
Right, okay, thank you.
If there's no more questions, I'd like to move that the committee notes the Waste and Environmental Solutions Activity Report for the quarter ending 31st of March 2021, and seconded Councillor Walker, and I invite anybody who wishes to speak to the item. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Yes, I think hearing that and knowing, because as I said, I am a label reader and I am very conscious when I buy things on, like, my husband goes a bit, he'll probably tell me off for this, but he does go a bit mad about, oh, you've got this green stuff again, I don't think it's actually working that well on the washing, or, you know, there's a perception that sometimes they're not as strong, but I always buy like the Earthwise or the eco-friendly, or, but it does determine what I purchase. But, you know, often I stand there looking at the label and think, is that recyclable or not? And it's not often clear. I think it'd be good, you know, a suggestion that maybe we can talk to supermarkets and organisations like that. I don't even think it's a local government job, but it affects us directly if we're going to be penalised for these items that you can't recycle, because it is often very difficult to tell if that's 2 or 3 or 5, or, you know, if it is ones that we actually recycle. It's not clear. And I've spent a lot of time, even with my glasses on, trying to see what on earth is that. So I think it would be really good to highlight that and make it very clear. These are products that we can recycle, these aren't. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to first of all thank Mr Henderson and his team for all of the extensive work that's been done in this area. I particularly note in this report the community initiatives that have been community-led in the past. For example, the Hawk and Hurl, which originated at Portobello, and the amount and the way that the community got involved in the amount of items that were diverted from landfill, the metal that was collected and used for the good of an organisation, and that has been copied, and I think it's a sense of great pride that community initiatives like that have been replicated. So too the rural recycling, that was the request of the Pukahiki community, and a variety of different approaches were tried. There were issues with vandalism, and finally we landed on a system that works, and it's being replicated in other places. The development of polystyrene recycling is a real bonus. And it's great to see the sustainable living workshops back. They were a feature some years ago. Dr. Maureen Howard used to run those, and it was around changing behaviours, and certainly was the genesis in our household of changing the way we did some things. It's really pleasing to see in the university area addressing some of the goals of the Sophia Charter. Yes, we have a ways to go, as we heard in some of the submissions around broken glass, but we've made a start. And also through the waste minimisation grants, we see some fantastic initiatives, both community and commercial, and through the small grants of organisations wanting to do their part. And it brings me to comment that I believe our community is educated about this, or trying to educate themselves. They are ready to do better in this space. They want to play their part. And I had somebody approach me the other day who said, I just want to know what I can do in my household and play my small part towards minimising waste to help the bigger picture. And I think we've got a large number of people in our community who are ready to play their part and to take up the opportunities that we provide through the work the team is doing. So thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you. Any more speakers? I just want to make a couple of comments, and one is, you know, we can't do much about bottles that need caps. You know, they do need a top on them when we buy them. So there's some things we cannot avoid. It's also very hard to avoid soft plastics. If your material comes with it, you can go to places where you can get away from it, but effectively these things are almost outside our control. And therefore I think that as a city we need to be able to respond to that. And just putting our hands up and saying that that's beyond us is really, in my opinion, not consistent with some of the messaging we've been giving back to our community and what our community have said towards us. If we are finding it difficult to move material to be processed at distant sites, then we need to consider about how we're going to process them here. So we need to take, you know, the last part, phase 4 of the Waste Futures project is coming forward now, and I would like to see in it a very active engagement with our waste stream to make sure that nothing's going to landfill. Every truckload that goes to landfill is a failure of either us, well, basically in the end becomes a failure of us to stop it going there. I applaud the team for what they're doing, but I really do think that we need to take an even more proactive approach to what's going on. I don't think that as a city we are diverting enough, and I think that we've been getting plenty of feedback from the community that we need to keep working more. I know that there's stuff afoot that isn't yet in the activity reports, but I also know that those soft plastics and some of those other things are not really being addressed at the moment, and I would want to see them addressed as we go moving forward. That said, I put it, all those in favour to note the report. All those against? Carried. Moving on to item 13. By the way, it's 2:45 or 10 to 3. I plan on just going straight through. We've only got a couple of items to go, but at 3:30 we'll readdress it based on how many questions and speeches are given. Item 13, Transport Activity Report for the quarter ending 31st of March 2021, Mr Drew and Ms Benson.
Happy to take it as read, Councillor. Thank you.
First question, Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'm interested in the comment you make about the streetlight rollout. I guess in the weather conditions we've had of late, the focus of the LED beam is more obvious than normal, and I think that is great for night sky reasons and others. But I'm wondering if what appears to me to be a fall off of the complaints about the LEDs is reflected in the feedback you get?
Yes, so we are definitely not getting as many complaints about LEDs. Oddly enough, now we get a lot of complaints about yellow lights. So, yeah.
Okay. In relation to the high pressure sodium, there's a lot of the highway, which is not our responsibility, I know, is still lit that way. What does Waka Kotahi plan to do in respect of those lights through Green Island and elsewhere? Do you know?
I will find that out, Councillor. I can't say for certain that Waka Kotahi are going to roll out LEDs. I'll find that out.
Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Just on paragraph 38 around the Central City project and the retail quarter upgrade, I seem to recall last year that we were all talking about shovels in the ground in April 2021, and I just want to understand what the future timeline looks like on that project.
So we will be starting some enabling works for George Street reasonably soon.
Does that mean shovels in the ground?
Yes.
Councillor Gary.
Ms Benson, we see in item 30 around lower speeds the most important determinant of the severity of an injury or probability of death in an accident. And yet we know that when we're doing work, for example, the school safety improvements, or we're doing a speed limit review, that a lot of people in the community see, design changes and think, oh yeah, that's fine, maybe a wider road or a more straightened road or whatever, and don't see the connection between design and speed limit and that connection with death and injury. What work is being done by Waka Kotahi to link that and communicate that to the public?
So we have some people within the transport team who work with schools, large organisations around road safety, teaching children cycling skills, those sorts of things. So we do have someone who goes to talk with other organisations about that.
I guess I was wanting to know around the wider community who look on, for example, in Mosgiel, the Safer Schools thing, and the reaction from the wider community just doesn't link with that fact about severity of injury and death. Is there any work being done in the wider community?
So I think, if you would, Councillor, let me check that with Waka Kotahi. They could be doing a rollout program. I know that there is a program called the Road to Zero, but in terms of the promotion of that, I haven't seen a lot yet, but I will check that.
I haven't either, and that's why I was interested. Thank you. And item 35 around the Peninsula Connection, you mentioned the design of section 5 and 2 options. Is there an issue that we're needing to come up with 2 options, or
no?
is
It's just
standard?
about width.
Yep. Okay, great. And finally, item 42 around mobility crossings. Why was that one in particular deferred, given the number of submissions we had about and the quality of the submissions around very clearly the issue around mobility crossings? Why was that one deferred particularly?
I think it was really more a case of timing, not of priority. So, but we definitely have a plan of those low cost, low risk mobility enhancements next year.
Councillor Radish.
Yes, a couple of questions. The item 9, the traffic management audits. I see there's a trend at the end here of a few items needing improvement. What sort of things need improvement?
So there'll be things like when you do a traffic management audit, potentially the paperwork isn't carried out properly, the signage isn't in the right place, the actual method of taking a road section for work, the method hasn't been right. So there's a variety of different things, Councillor.
Yes, I mean, I see that it must be relatively minor because there was nothing dangerous, but I was just curious as to what was included in that. And similarly over at 22, capital renewals, there's elements of the plan renewal about have renewal programs been deferred and budgets adjusted. Why was that?
That was due to available funding.
Okay. And lastly, the catch pit cleaning. So this is our sumps in the road. Yeah. Ironically, I noticed a year ago, the sump near the Portobello Road pumps was blocked when we had a bit of surface flooding in the town, and which being the very closest one to those pumps. Have you, were you aware of that, and has anything been done about that particular one being so close to a lot of activity? Because there was a lot of contractors working on the pump, on the the pumping site and clearing the screens and doing stuff there, but they didn't clean the sump.
So sorry, Councillor, I don't have that detail of that particular catch pit, but I can find that out.
I just mentioned that because it's a little bit ironic being so close to all the activity at the time. Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Just following up with Councillor Barker's question around the Central City project, will you elaborate on any of the details of where that is at? And
so I think we're going to be doing some testing of ground conditions.
Okay. One of the issues that I've seen or can understand could happen, have all the property owners been contacted that actually have tenancies regarding signing up tenants for next year for the different flats, etc., along that area. And the reason I ask the question is because if I was signing into a tenancy now where everybody understands there's construction except the tenants, it would greatly reduce the impact of complaints and issues, but everybody understands what the project is and how much impact it may have on their quality of life in the area.
I'll confirm that for you, but I do know that Glenn was doing a lot of walking over the past 2 weeks with our engagement and communications advisor through George Street.
And that is in particular to the people that will be living in the area, not the retail spaces and office
I'll
space.
confirm that point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm delighted that there's no such thing as the mud tank anymore. That'll save us a lot of problems. I'm looking forward to them being referred to as solid material diversion receptacles. However, that's not what I want to ask about. In this report and the following one, I don't see any mention of the issue that's created a lot of media attention in town recently in respect of red light or amber light running. And I was interested in some of the comments from your staff about what our SCAT system can tell us. And I'm wondering why, and here's my question, Mr. Chairman, if we have the information about which, from that system somehow, about which intersections are the biggest problems in terms of bad driver behaviour, why are we not continuing to give it to the police so they can do something about it?
That's a very good question. That data is really invaluable. The struggle we have that it takes so long to interpret it into something that's meaningful. So what we're looking to do next financial year is to buy an add-on to that system so it actually does it for you, councillor, instead of someone having to sit there in front of it all day long.
So, given, and I think most of us have had individual approaches about this, and we all make our own observations about seriously dangerous behaviour at traffic lights, not just trucks. You were telling us that it's going to be another year until we're able to pass that information in a more usable form to the police?
No, I'm going to get it next financial year, which starts on July 1st.
Oh, I'm sorry, my misunderstanding, I apologise. And is there any capacity for the city off its own bat to investigate the installation of red light cameras at those really badly behaved intersections, if I can put it that way?
I would have to take some advice on that.
I'll raise that with the chairman at the end of the meeting, if I may. Thank you.
Writing that down. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. The other day I heard this very interesting interview around LED lights. And I don't know, I'm just wondering if we've investigated any of this or are aware of it. But apparently they're saying new research is now saying that LEDs they're showing a strong link. This is street lights, not just in your home, but in your home's possibly worse, I don't know, but between prostate and breast cancer.
I haven't heard that, councillor.
Just what my counsel is that we really need to focus on the activity report. And I know that it's frustrating that maybe sometimes you don't get to talk to the transport team at the committee level otherwise, but if we can just keep our questions to the items.
Just that we did have something about the LEDs in here, so I was just bringing up that there's new research saying they're quite harmful, and I just wondered if we're aware of that and what we're...
I could probably add to that. We are aware about it. We had specialist advisors before the LEDs became a project, so that was traversed well before the installation of the LEDs, and was not considered a significant enough a risk to have any kind of impact. The LEDs are shielded, and so they only direct light onto the places that light is needed, and you're not living in that light, you're only passing through that light from time to time.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. And it's good to see that the catch pits, that they're now called, have been inspected at least twice within the financial year. It says approximately 90 catch pits are on a priority list, and I was just wondering where those were.
So those catch pits tend to be in South Dunedin, there's some in Mosgiel. Yep.
Oh, cool, thank you. And I note that a lot of people are buying electric bikes, a lot of adults, and I was just wondering what the status is for, we've got the Harbour Cycleway and the Peninsula Cycleway and an increase in cyclists. Is there any training for adults for getting back on bikes? Because there was an article, course, getting older riders back in the saddle, and just what work is being done in that space as well.
I'm not aware, Councillor, of there being any training for older people on bikes. There is for younger people, but it's probably a reasonably good idea.
Cool, thank you.
Councillor Van der Vis.
With the reduction in capital renewals, 22 referred to earlier, less than half of the curb and channel that was planned, only a bit more than half of the footpaths, and a significant reduction in reseal as well. Are we in a situation as a result that we basically now are creating a deferred maintenance issue?
I think it'd be fair to say that we will be catching up, and there will be some deferred maintenance that we'll have to try and catch up with, yes.
So the deferred maintenance that is referred to here under capital renewals, it's almost 50%, more than 50% in the case of curb and channel. What years do you anticipate that we might be able to catch that up in, and is it budgeted for?
So I'd have to just double check the second year of the 3-year period with Waka Kotahi in terms of funding, Councillor, and come back to you on that one.
Thank you.
And just following up from Councillor Van der Vis's question, these deferrals have come as a reduction on Waka Kotahi assistance rate funding, which has been across the board national reduction in funding of all road controlling authorities. Is that correct?
That's correct, yep.
And if they don't come back and step up their funding, then all territorial authorities will be facing what will end up being backlogs on renewals.
Yep, that's correct.
Cool.
To put a bit of context on it, 53% was mentioned before in a previous thing. Is it the 53% that it actually has been reduced for these items as well?
So, yes, well, no, it's not a reduction of 53%, it's a reduction of the amount of total money that they give us. So if they give us, if we need $10 for the year, they're only giving us 8.
And given that they're only giving us 8, does that mean we reduce the number of projects that we do but still get the 53%?
That's correct. That's correct. Our approach is the money that we need from Waka Kotahi is based on our asset management plan, so it's purely condition based.
Thank you.
Councillor Fiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair, tēnā koe, Ms Benson. My question relates to contract sustainability, item 21 on page 86, regarding the Fulton Hogan contract. It's great that there are cadet opportunities for Māori in Pasifika. Is there, forgive my ignorance, but is there built into the contract some sort of assessment of welfare of the cadets, or what happens? Is it just, are those discussions limited to just Fulton Hogan and Oka?
So the welfare of the cadets would be a process that I'm absolutely convinced Fulton Hogan would have in place.
Very good. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, just a brief question in terms of the the tick box exercise on page 91, the fact that this report talks about sustainability, workplace travel planning, school travel planning, etc., etc., it's got not applicable when it comes to the environment strategy. Is that just a mistake?
I think that's a mistake, Councillor. Yeah.
Thank you. Phew, you have me worried.
I have a question on item 13, which is the MIGs. Or MIGs. Can you explain to me, this is obviously a new metric, can you explain to us what that is? And also in context of item 23, which has already been raised, that we're cutting back on rehabilitation at the same time.
So what happens when we've been out, someone's been out, they've done an asset assessment of a curb or a channel or a footpath, and they've said that it needs a particular treatment, it needs to be resurfaced, or it needs, what is the treatment that asset needs? We then go round and audit that treatment to make sure that we are actually putting back the asset to what it needs and not gold plating it and not under investing in it either. So it's really a way of just making sure that you've got sound asset management principles and you're not under investing or over investing.
Okay, thanks very much. Any more questions? Then I am happy to move that the committee notes the transport activity report for the quarter ending 31st of March 2021. Second to Councillor Elder. Anyone wish to speak? Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Chair. This year will be the first year that the children of Broad-Based School will be able to participate fully in the Walk and Wheels program mentioned in the report, and that's because the particular section of the Peninsula Connection has been completed. And when it started, overall, the FAR rate, the financial assistance rate that's been referred to today, was 58%. And so for every year there's been a decrease of 1%, and we're going to soon be at 53%. And so I just want to note that, and I want to note the work of staff, of Ms Benson, in liaising with residents as difficulties have arisen and issues have arisen, to deal with those and to work with those members of our community. And I want to urge colleagues to attend the opening on the 27th of June. It's not mentioned in here, but it is a very significant day for that community and for those school children whose predecessors led the project and lobbied this council. So I look forward to seeing you all on June the 27th.
Thank you. I just want to make one quick comment at the end, and that is, as in the report says, the capital renewals program has gone down, and that will mean our renewals go down if we want to access that FAR rate that's handed towards us from Waka Kotahi. Waka Kotahi in general has got less money to administer through the rest of the country and is having flow-on effects. We're not by any means the worst road controlling authority affected. I know that other road controlling authorities in our area have had even bigger cuts to their renewals. However, it is something that if it does not rectify itself in the next year or two will actually be a significant issue for all cities in the country to face. So I'm hoping that the government takes note of that and the Waka Kotahi's budget is re-established at some point. Any more speakers? If not, then I will put it. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item number 14, Land Transport Rule Setting of Speed Limits 2021 consultation. Mr Drew and Ms Benson still. Mr Spears. Oh, Mr Spears. Still Simon. Yes. Very nicely you keep using the same first name. Welcome. Do you want to speak to this at all? Any questions? Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you. As everyone did, I read this with great interest, and I must say I found the idea of further regulation as potentially problematic, but I'm comfortable that the nature of some of the proposals allows us a degree of local autonomy, and I'm referring in particular to the last part of the submission in paragraph 15, where there's a statement of strong support for the capacity to designate an urban traffic area. I'm asking because I've thought for a long time, and a lot of people in the community have argued to me directly and to others, that we need to have much safer, slower residential streets. And I think your other report refers to a wider speed problem across the city and other cities. Are you confident that should the document proceed in the form it's proceeding now, that that capacity that we have to respond to our community's concerns, especially given the volume of vehicles that we're having to manage for one reason or another, will still have the capacity to create those calmer, less quieter
we're
streets?
confident with that.
Thank you.
Radish.
Yes, on page 98, item number 3, the DCC seeks more information on the benefits for speed management plans to be completed at a regional level. What exactly do you mean by that?
So under the proposal, what is an ongoing bylaw process gets compacted down to a single submission in a 10-year plan kind of format. So it just means that a lot of the work gets front-loaded, and there'll be a lot of resourcing implications we're not sure of at this stage. So it's just the capacity to deliver a regional plan in that format.
Right. Thank you.
Any more questions? Councillor?
Are you aware, I mean, there's a lot of focus on speed in this country. Are you aware that countries like Germany don't have this focus on speed and yet have something like half the death and accident rates that we have here in New Zealand?
No.
Okay, I'll put the question differently then. With this enormous amount of resource being put into limiting speed here, should we not perhaps look at countries that have much more successful accident and death rates on their roads and see whether they also go down this very restrictive looking at speed issue all the time?
We can certainly suggest that to Waka Kotahi, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Look, I tried to find this in the document, and forgive me if I just simply overlooked it, but the new approach to road safety cameras, my understanding previously had been that it has to be gazetted, and only if it's gazetted, and that doesn't always happen, that you get a speed camera in a particular area. What does the new approach involve, and will it allow more speed cameras to be put in relevant areas where there are speeding issues?
As I understand it, the use of speed cameras will be put into the plans, how they're intended to be used, but I'm not sure what the longer implications of that are. So they'll be planned out, but we can make decisions around that going forward.
Okay, thank you. And the other question I had was around some wording in the submission. So that question I asked earlier around the connection between in the mind of the community, speed and injury, and the road to zero. You mentioned road to zero. So in our submission, it mentions strategic leadership, and it does mention effective community consultation and engagement. Do you think that that covers the comms that will be needed to educate the community about the link between the two and what road to zero actually means in terms of speed limits and so forth?
I think there'll probably need to be more than that to actually get the message across to people. So I think some kind of national focus from Waka Kotahi with other TAs potentially.
Thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Is the intention for the traffic calming lowering a lot of speeds to try to deter people from using their car?
No, it's not, councillor.
Right. So once we approve this, will that mean individual roads will have to come to us as well separately, or will that be included as a blanket on, like, if we say yes, we're happy with all this, does that mean that, say for example, George Street, that we've been told will be 10 kilometres for a speed limit, is that going to be...
So councillor, as a point of order.
Yeah, can I, through the chair, we're talking to a report here for a submission. We're not talking generally about instigating anything. This is a submission, not an implementation of any rules.
Yeah, I'm going to uphold it because as I hear you speaking, you seem to be talking about basically the consequences of speed limit changes, whereas in fact what we're talking about is the government is proposing a different mechanism by which we consult on speed limit changes, and so that's actually that's the focus of our submission back to Waka Kotahi, is the mechanism by which speed limits are changed, not the consequences of changing a speed limit.
Right, but my question is around us, because often a road will come to us individually and we then, through a bylaw or that process, but what I'm asking is, I suppose I'm asking, if we agree to this, does that mean that will change? Can you just explain how that would change?
So in this process, decisions to make changes to speed limits will be put into a speed management plan, which will be submitted to a regional transport committee. So we will still have the ability to make recommendations for changes to speed limits. It's just part of a different planning format.
So will it mean that council or councillors around here, it wouldn't go to a bylaws committee where we would decide whether we're happy with that or not, it would then go to the regional committee instead, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Right, so when, if that's the case, how quickly would that take action? Which is in here somewhere, is it? It is, I think.
Every 3 years.
Yeah, it's a 3-yearly cycle.
So and that would start, when would that start?
There's an interim period in 2022 and officially it starts in 2023.
All right, so this will be 3 years' time, then that the responsibility for doing that will be taken off us and given to the regional committee.
There will also be a process for required speed limit changes outside of the plan, but we're still waiting for more guidance on that.
Will councils have any say at all on that once that comes in, if it's approved?
Yes, I believe so.
In what way?
There will still be a development of a speed management plan, and there will still be a consultation process that goes alongside that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just follow that up actually by a question on point 8 of our submissions on page 99, which is we seek clarity on the alternative process for speed limits. Having just come back from the Regional Transport Committee meeting, I can actually see this as still ambiguous as to how this is going to happen. Have you sought clarity, or do we have clarity on what happens in the intervening period? If it's 3 years apart between a regional speed management plan, what happens in years 1 and 2 in between? The plan, as I see it, says that we can do changes to the speed of a street if we see its use change during that period. But is it fair to say that it's ambiguous whether or not we could still hold the kind of speed limit reviews we do now, where we engage with the public on a yearly basis?
Yeah, the proposal says there will be an interim method that will allow us to make proposed changes as required, but the detail of that has not been provided, so it is still ambiguous.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Gary.
This is really for you, Mr. Chair, just asking whether there's an opportunity, and forgive me if I've missed this opportunity, to strengthen the submission, given the answer of Ms Benson around education and that link with the Road to Zero. I was specifically thinking about a possible paragraph, and I'd leave the staff to think of the wording, but between 2 and 3, just around an education campaign. I don't know how you want to handle that. I'm open to suggestion.
First question I'd need an answer to is, when is this submission due? 18?
25th, I think.
25th. So that's a few days away. I haven't really thought about how to handle this. Claire, can I have some? Given that your change is not substantive but important, if we were to amend the resolution, well, it just says with any amendments now, so we could approve it with amendments. I'm just trying to get the word. Can we get the resolution up? I'd rather not do the amendment now.
You could delegate to me the ability to make changes subject to what broadly the things that council would like included.
So I recall on another occasion we, somebly said, look, this is the kind of theme, and leave it to staff.
Yeah.
Chief Executive to
So if we can just
work
get
out
the wording of that right, so that would be approves the DC submission and delegates to the.
You could say with additional paragraphs on X, Y and Z, with the Chief Executive to finalise the wording.
How about it's 3:25 and people might want to get a cup of tea, so why don't we take a 5-minute adjournment to sort this out? Second, all those in favour? Your seats. What I'll have to do is start the meeting. Just waiting for the amended motion to go up. I will call this meeting back to order though, so we're back. Allows the Chief Executive to modify the submission as it relates to what Councillor Gowrie had said. Any more questions? Councillor Houlihan.
Do we have anyone to ask them to? So my question is around question 10 on page 99, where it says the DCC supports the strong leadership taken within proposal 6 of the new rule regarding consistent speeds and treatments around schools, and that it encourages the safer school streets. Can I just clarify, because those the safer schools, while the intention is great, what happened, it was very, very unpopular with the things that happened with it, and I'm just wondering, does this, by agreeing to this, does this mean that we will continue doing what we've been doing?
So what we'll be continuing to look at what we're doing is reducing the speed around schools with things like raised platforms, those sorts of things.
Right. Okay. Because a lot of those things were very, very unpopular in the communities when they were put in, and I'm just wondering, is it wise for us to continue along that when it's caused a lot of...
You could probably choose at the time to vote, but if you voted yes, it would be tacit support for that statement.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions? Councillor Elder.
As to that subject, and that is around the Safer Schools projects, there is the requirement for some consultation around putting those things in. Is there not?
Yeah, yes.
Exactly, yeah. That's what I was clarifying.
Very good. Any more questions? Councillor Houlihan.
Yes, sorry. How did the trial go? We did the trial of the Safer Schools. Would you say, how would the results stand up from that?
It's not relevant to the item. That question's not relevant to the item.
The Safer Schools is clearly mentioned in here.
Not a trial in Mosgiel or a trial in any particular school district in town. It's not the item.
Okay. I've got another question. I'm not sure who this is for, but is this this move, because it is my understanding of this, but it's limited, is it's taking power away from councils and moving it into a more centralised model? Would you say that's fair to say? Combining sort of, in our situation, DCC, ORC, and so almost a unitary council type thing?
I wouldn't go that far. My interpretation of it's coordination of speed limits across a region as opposed to doing it individually.
It is, of course, because we've had three waters that's bringing things together, and now this is, do you think any of that's aligned, where it's trying to centralise things?
Not to my knowledge, no.
No. Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Then I'll... Radich.
Yeah, speaking to the schools, safer schools, or safer school streets, is there flexibility in how the program is interpreted, or is it laid down by central government?
So there's a certain number of schools that you have to get done per year that's laid out by Waka Kotahi. any of the treatments that we would put around those schools are based on NZTA standards.
Yes.
So speed bumps, those things, they're all standardised treatments.
So there's standardised types of treatments, but is there a standard format? So you have to do so many speed bumps of such a height and
no,
build-outs and curbs and things like that, or is there flexibility in that determination?
There's flexibility in that, but there is, Waka Kotahi have made it very clear that they want the speed reduced around schools by 2024, I think it is.
Yes. Yeah, my question is just about the flexibility of interpretation. Thank you.
Any more questions? Councillor Elder.
Is it the desire, as part of this, that there is a consistent approach across the country? So when people approach schools, whether it's Auckland, Timbuktu, well, not Timbuktu, Auckland or Timaru, or Dunedin, it's the same consistent approach.
That would be correct.
I thought we were implying that Timaru is as isolated as Timbuktu. Councillor Hurlan.
Does that mean all areas put boulevards and, pot plants and trestles outside that...
Councillor, there's an enormous report attached to the end of this, and a lot of what's going on is actually in that report. And I do not want us to diverge away to design and other such things, because that's not what NZTA, or not what Waka Kotahi is actually consulting on. They're consulting on speed reviews and the ability to set up school speed areas and the ability to set up urban speed areas. But the rest of it is coming in a very separate set of documentation. So if we'd end up designing everything if we don't stay on the item, very specifically on the item.
The only reason I asked that question was because of the answer that Councillor Elder got to her question is that all of them are the same. So that's why I was wondering if that's what they've done everywhere else.
Through the chair, the answer to Councillor Elder is consistency of speed. Yes. Councillor Houlihan, probably not so much a standard speed bump or curb build out.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, then I would like to move that. Councillor Garrett, do you want to second it? As it's up on the board there. Anybody want to speak to the motion? Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for indulging me on that. We know that there is a clear link between speed and injury and death, and that's a fact. Yet in the minds of many in our community, they don't connect those, and we've seen that. Although people theoretically understand the importance of a slower speed around schools, we've seen how sometimes they respond when those projects are rolled out. I've been fascinated to watch as the Peninsula Connection has reached nearer completion in communities as we went through various processes, the response to speeds and an idea that perhaps the speed might go up. And so there's a real lack of understanding, as I'm aware, of what the Road to Zero means, and that design and speeds are only two tools of about five. And so thank you for including this. I think it's really important, and I'm sure the Chief Executive will find the right wording to include that. Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Van der Vis.
Councillor Geary has highlighted what I believe to be a simplistic connection between speed and accidents. In background, item 3 here, it says speed is a major contributing factor to deaths and serious injuries on New Zealand roads. Obviously, if you don't have any speed, you don't have any crashes, you don't have any deaths. So we can just take that as a given. It says then, in the event of a crash, that is, assuming that there is a crash, regardless of cause, and it wants to disregard the causes of crashes, the speed of impact is the next most important determinant of the severity of injuries. That's all quite true. But The provisos are, in the event of a crash, that is to say that there is one in the first place, and also regardless of cause. If you look at successful countries overseas who have half the death and injury rates that we have in New Zealand, this obsession with speed is simply not there. I've travelled and driven over my business career in many, many countries and never had anything like the experience of the focus on speed as we have in New Zealand, and never anything like the death rate and accident rate we have here. If you look at the causes of an accident, 3 major causes spring to mind. One of them is lack of driver attention. Another one is traffic congestion. And a third is the time that you spend driving. These are all causes of accidents. If you halve the speed of your motorist, you increase the problems with lack of attention. You increase congestion, and you double the amount of time that you're on the road subject to an accident. So getting back to the background item 3, in the event of a crash, regardless of cause, that's all true, but we shouldn't disregard the fact that slow driving is actually a major cause of accidents. And I believe that's one of the issues here in New Zealand. People say that, in Germany they have far less accidents because they have wonderful autobahns, and they do have wonderful autobahns. But the fact is that they also have all these small national roads, as we have here. They have 88 million people there. They have far more traffic running through Germany, all the other European countries, because the roads don't charge. They don't charge for the autobahns there. And they also have open speed limits on some of the autobahns, most of them 130 k's. They do all of this. They move far more traffic through their country on a whole range of roads, with 2 months in winter of snow and ice and, quite frankly, terrible driving conditions. And still, we kill twice as many people on our roads and have twice as many accidents as they do. In all the 6 months that I once spent in Germany, I saw a speed trap once. A number of times, there were motorcycle cops coming up the inside telling people to speed up, because the problems of congestion that you get when vehicles slow down, or when you get a difference in speed and you have one really slow vehicle and these massive tailbacks and the frustrations that result from that. All of these issues, I don't feel are addressed here. What we need to do as a country, rather than get into the minutiae of all these different speed limits and all these different situations, I think, is simply look at the models that we have overseas. I very much agree that around schools, we need to have vastly reduced speeds in the areas where students are walking straight out of the school and where they're being picked up and dropped off. The Germans deal with it by having curb protrusions, 20k speed limit, and cameras. And I know this because I got a fine on one. Hadn't read the signage, but then I was just, first-time foreigner. I only got caught the once. Apart from that, when you frustrate traffic and you create congestion and you increase the time spent on the roads and you cause lack of attention, those are all causes of accidents that aren't addressed in this here. So I don't have a particular motion to put up. I don't even have a particular problem with this submission, except that I think it fundamentally misses the point, and that background item number 3 misrepresents what is the actual issue. Sure, if you have an accident, then high speed is undesirable. But low speeds actually cause accidents, and you need to have a proper balance. Cheers.
Councillor Whiting.
Thank you. As the chair of the 2020 speed limit bylaw review, which is still currently through the deliberation process, I don't feel I can vote on this, so I'll be abstaining on this submission.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't actually going to speak on this, but after the comments from Councillor van der Vos, I feel inclined to do so. I mean, gosh, this is not an under-researched thing going on throughout the world for many, many decades, and there is a plethora of data, evidence, peer-reviewed academic research going back for decades, proving the statement that speed, as it says in number 3, is a major contributing factor to deaths and serious injuries on New Zealand roads. And for Councillor van der Vos to say there's not a great focus on speed in Europe is disingenuous. It's where I'm from. There is a massive focus.
Point of order. Point of order.
I'm being accused of being disingenuous when in fact I have years of driving experience on European roads. The accusation of being disingenuous implies that A, Councillor Walker knows my state of mind, believes my experience and then what I'm saying to be two different things.
I'll uphold your point of order.
Yeah, happy to retract and withdraw and apologise.
You do apologise?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, from my perspective, coming from Europe and having travelled to 25 countries in Europe, from my perspective, there is a massive focus on speed reduction in Europe. Most European jurisdictions have worked very hard over the years to bring their death rates down by reduction of speed. And I agree with Councillor van der Vos, we should focus on overseas examples when it comes to speed. I'd particularly choose Sweden, where for decades they have had 30k maximum kilometres in all their urban zones. Go figure, Sweden has by far the lowest death rates on its road per capita in Europe. I'll move on from what Councillor van der Vos said, just to support, I'm a great supporter of proposal number 6, which is the speed limits around schools. I think it has the double benefit of obviously providing opportunities for our young'uns to be able to get to school using their legs, their bikes, their boards, their scooters, whatever. But more importantly, this proposal will undoubtedly and thankfully save lives, and I don't think any parent wants their kids not to come home from school. Thank you.
Councillor Radich.
Yes, I too have done a lot of driving in Europe and have enjoyed the faster roads in Europe, enabling rapid transit times, and those roads are entirely suitable for the higher speeds that they have there. And similarly, I noticed that Waka Kotahi has seen fit to raise the speed limit on some roads in New Zealand that are now 110 kilometres an hour in occasional places. So the point for me is that this is not what Waka Kotahi is trying to do is not impose a general lowering of speed limits. It's merely trying to get appropriate speeds in appropriate places. And I'm gratified by the raising of speed limits in separated highways. That one north of Auckland is the particular one I'm thinking of. And similarly, we don't have to impose a blanket set of restrictions. I think it's a good idea to lower speed limits around schools, but doing it in a people-friendly way is entirely appropriate. And there have been instances here in Dunedin where there's perhaps overzealous interpretation of what is feasible has created ire amongst the people in proximity or the people attending that school or whatever. I think some areas where we have brought in, we have lowered the speed limits around schools and put in structures to ensure that have worked well. And a couple of those I travel regularly, and they're perfectly fine to negotiate on an ongoing basis. So there is a balance to be achieved, and that can be worked out. And my main question of the of staff was to find out if there is flexibility in how the Waka Kotahi rules are interpreted and instigated and to suit the circumstances, and there is that flexibility, and therefore I encourage the staff to exercise that flexibility as they put in the structures and continue to lower speeds around schools, but maintain speeds where appropriate.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. One person is killed every day on New Zealand roads and another 7 are seriously injured. I think the goal that NZTA or Waka Kotahi has for a zero tolerance of death or injury is a very good goal to have. However, I don't directly believe that speed is a direct killer. But of course, if you get hit by a fast car, obviously it might kill you. That goes without saying. But I think there's ways around it, and there's ways to do it safely without. I think what my hope is that we'll have common sense with this, because what we've seen in the past is where, for example, safer schools, that I think was, as a mother, an excellent idea to have, lower speed limits. I haven't got any issue with having lower speed limits around schools. However, unfortunately, what we put out there, and I think Gore did the same by the sound of it, was these planter pots and things jutting out on the road that actually made it quite dangerous for cyclists, so that when there was a car there and a cyclist, they couldn't even get past because the things were jutting out so far. So it meant that cyclists were at risk of getting injured or dying on the road. So we can't have that either. I mean, we can't save one and kill another. You have to have safety. And I do think we also see sometimes extremes where, for example, what we have yet to come with George Street is where we're going to have a speed limit, my understanding is, of 10 kilometres. Now, this is at a speed limit where people will almost not be able to get their engine going. I think there's a point where you have to say, how ridiculous is this? And so while I'm all for safe driving, reducing injuries and death on our roads, obviously no one could not agree with that. I think we need common sense and slower speed limits around schools, yes, but all these other items on the road and everywhere is just going too far, and reducing George Street to 10 kilometres and is once again, in my opinion, a step too far.
Okay, point of order got raised right at the very end. And I will uphold the point of order that the speed limit on George Street is not in this item. But you've finished speaking, so there's no. Your Worship. Point of order.
Point of order. Councillor interjecting like that with essentially offensive comments, I don't think is appropriate in the meeting.
Is that the
I would ask you to
comment that Councillor Benscope said that's a relief? I'll uphold that, because I do think that we've got to confine our comments to specifically through the chair or when we're speaking, as opposed to just giving commentary. Thank you. Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Houlihan has said, if you get hit by a fast car, obviously you will die. And Councillor Vanivus has said, if you have an accident, lower speeds are desirable. And it's hard to argue with either of those statements. So we can either pretend that we won't have accidents on our transport network, whatever the cause, or we can make the network safer so that in case you do have accidents, whether you're driving a vehicle or travelling on foot or travelling by bike, you are less likely to suffer death or serious injury as a result of that crash. And I'm not going to try and untangle the Gordian knot of libertarian logic used to defend the status quo, but I do want to make a couple of comments on the consultation document itself, which I think is positive to some degree. I welcome the longer term, asking us to take a longer term view in terms of how we think about road safety improvements and how we manage that, of which managing speed on the network is one part of that. I appreciate that. And certainly focusing on infrastructure and how we design the space in terms of managing speed, as opposed to relying solely on the posted speed limit as something that's going to drive behaviour change, although there's a certain irony in Waka Kotahi telling us that we need to build safety into the road network. At the same time, they're telling us they don't have any money to give us to do any addition, what we're currently doing, let alone taking on more work. So there's a question in terms of how it's funded. I'm nervous around the comments that the assertions made in the consultation document around giving us greater flexibility in how we manage the system. I mean, that may be true insofar as the how we go about achieving the outcomes that we want. I mean, and that's probably desirable, but I don't share the view that the document has that the system we currently have is overly onerous in terms of managing and reviewing speed limits. And if we're in a situation where, and this is lacking detail as the submission points out, if we're in a situation where we go from being able to do this every year to once every 3 years, then I don't think that is a good outcome for us. It's good to see the acknowledgement of the need for lower, safer speeds around schools, but kids also go other places before school or after school or in the weekends, and they don't stop being any more vulnerable because they're not going to their primary place of learning. And certainly, given what we know about developmental psychology and the propensity for risk-taking behaviours, that age probably goes closer to 24, 25, and you might want to think about that in terms of what we're planning to do in the tertiary precinct or areas in the city that are high trip generators for young adults as well as for children. What I don't understand is the push here for this work to be managed at a regional level, and I'm not entirely sure what the problem is that they're trying to solve by having this planning done at a regional level. If it is solely about trying to manage cross-boundary issues where you have a road that crosses from one road controlling authority to another one, then setting up a system like this seems like an overly bureaucratic sledgehammer being used to crack a nut, and I would prefer that that there were more bilateral options made available to us to be able to solve those sorts of issues, rather than creating this whole other system. There are timing issues, obviously, in that they want it to Waka Kotahi want this to align with the Regional Land Transport Plan because that makes sense for them. But if what they're doing is asking us to build things in the roading network to keep people safer, then that will come far too late in our process to have a meaningful impact on our 10-year planning cycle. So either the RLTP needs to shift or this needs to be decoupled from that. But it seems that procedural point, or that kind of sequencing, if you like, seems to have been overlooked in terms of how we deal with this. And certainly, I don't see any kind of reservations, but there's potentially value in there being oversight of the plans at a national level. But again, if that guidance and oversight is being provided by the agency itself, then I don't see how you necessarily need both that and the Regional Transport Committee aggregating and approving the plans that we come up with as a road controlling authority. So there's certainly merit in many of these suggestions, and hopefully the feedback, and certainly from the conversations that are going on in our neighbouring districts, the feedback is fairly universal along some of these points, particularly around process. I would urge Waka Kotahi to take that on board and take the good bits out of this and strip out the unwieldiness that could easily spring from it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly share those comments we've just heard about the nature of the process. But in terms of the local activities that we've seen in the last year or two, I think our staff need to be complimented on the initiatives that they've followed to make our community safer for everyone. And yes, there are some people who don't like a curb protrusion here and there, or some other traffic calming measure, or that don't like signage that has taken away a car park, or that don't like colours on pavement across the road, whatever else. But the development of and introduction of more roundabouts, as one of the traffic calming measures in the part of town that I regularly drive, has been overwhelmingly welcomed by users, both foot traffic users, cyclists and motorists. And I think one of the issues where we have a long way to go is in fact around driver skill levels. I think patently there have been some completely factually inaccurate statements made today about European examples. I taught, for example, for well over an academic year in Germany. I know how seriously they concentrate on speed, and I've paid my share of tickets that I had anticipated getting both at that time and subsequently because of the policing of speed off the Autobahn. And it's true that there once was no speed limit on the Autobahn, but now there are recommended limits. The reason that crashes on those roads are less serious.
Point of order.
Yes.
The statement just made by Councillor Benson Pope is wholly inaccurate. There are still autobahns where there is no speed limit at all. His characterisation of...
I do believe he actually said...
I didn't say there was a speed limit, I said there were recommended limits.
Other speed limits. Yes.
Recommended speeds.
I think it's a fairly minor point of order, so I won't uphold it.
Clearly the construction of the roads plus helicopter ambulance services that were long decades ahead of what we've finally come to have meant that they have lower road toll than we do for mostly design reasons. But the suggestion, not just by Councillor van der Vis, that speed isn't the problem, is just nonsense, because in our wider community you don't have to go further than the Octagon or any suburban street to see that bad driver behaviour endangers not only the people involved in the excess speed but other users of our roads. And the examples and the concern in the media in recent weeks about issues with traffic lights is a prime example of exactly that issue. There are many people who are not exercising the privilege of driving on our roads responsibly, and the more we can do to correct that environment, the better.
Any more speakers? I realise as the mover I forgot to speak to start with, which is my fault because I didn't direct us to what the item really is, which is this particular submission on rules around how you will set your speed limits. It's not a debate about speed or any other such things. It's actually it's a fairly tight document around process. How does a road controlling authority set its speed limit? Currently, we have to go through a consultative process that requires a bylaw. That will be effectively removed if this process goes through. We consult on speed once a year. This process will move it out to once every 3 years. It has in it a proposition that if a road controlling authority, a council, wishes to bring in a speed limit change during the intervening period, it can in special circumstances. And the issue here is that special circumstances are as of yet not well defined. In our own submissions, we point out that we would like to still be able to do this on a yearly basis. The general consensus among road controlling authorities at the Otago Southern Regional Transport Committee, where this came up just last Friday, was that it has a role to play in dealing with roads that cross boundaries and setting up consistencies on those roads. But we felt as a committee that we could probably sort those 10 or 20 roads out ourselves. There was a feedback that this will put an enormous amount of burden on the regional transport committees, and as His Worship said, and it was repeated by almost everybody, are we fixing a problem that doesn't even exist? Now, there was a desire to be able to set up in what they call mega maps, which is the maps of all the roads, a consistency of reporting so that your GPS on your car would have the right speed in it, and that's definitely a positive. The ability to give flexibility around school zones, again, I believe is a positive, and other areas of flexibility on setting up zones. But it's still ambiguous as to what the role of the Regional Transport Committee will be and what a regional speed management plan will actually look like and how you will construct it. I have not heard in the consultation period with Waka Kotahi a consistent answer between who will set the speeds, whether it will be set at the Regional Transport Committee level or whether the road controlling authorities will set them and then just gazette them at the RTC. And that is still, in my opinion, something that needs to be clarified and sorted out. But it was strange to the extent to which we wandered off into our general feelings about speed in general. Maybe it wasn't that strange, but I do think we sometimes need to make sure we're not just getting away from what it is that we're talking about in the items. Because with these meetings can go on for a very long period of time because we just get a word and then everybody heads off in a direction and they just want to speak this way and that on it. This is about how do you set speed limits? What will the role of the Regional Transport Committee be versus over the role of the road controlling authority? That's effectively it. Our concern, I believe, from an administrative side is that it could become unwieldy, and the issue of timing, as His Worship pointed out, it actually, I think it's point 6 in our submission too. We would like it to be 1 year out of cycle. If this does go ahead, 1 year out of cycle with the Regional Land Transport Plan and the long-term plans. As it is, the Regional Land Transport Plan and the long-term plans all landed at the same time. And as you see in our transport renewal spend, every road controlling authority got caught out by a reduction in Waka Kotahi spending that we didn't know was coming until the last minute. And we're not so anywhere near as badly off as Invercargill and Southland, who have got substantially bigger cuts. So this idea that you can roll them all together and all land at the same time might sound good in theory, but in fact they're actually quite difficult to put together in practice. That said, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Abstain? Abstain. Still carried. Okay. Item 15, proposed road stopping at Neil Street, Abbotsford. I'll have the staff sit down just for a second. Are there any questions? His Worship.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think I've raised this previously, but the papers has, and I've got no reason for raising this in particular now, but it's more of a general comment. The papers as they're presented to us for this meeting don't tell us who the affected parties are, and it's just in terms of being for elected members to be able to manage their conflicts of interest, it makes it hard to know whether you should be sitting back from discussing an item that would be to the benefit of someone you may have links with, and I don't expect staff to be able to answer that now, but and if we could consider that for future reports when they come to us.
I put that at the end for items of consideration. Thank you.
We can address that next time.
Yeah. And now, of course, that I've made you sit down, I'd like to move that. Can we have the whole thing up? Because I don't want to read it all out. I move then that the committee approves the public notification of the intention of stopping a portion of legal road adjacent to 26 Neil Street, Abbotsford, subject to the applicant agreeing to points 1 through 5. Seconder? Oh, one of you two. Councillor Walker. All those in favour? Against? Carried. And now item 16, proposed road stopping part of Scobie Road, Waverley. That seems very steep, is my only question. Is it a very steep paper road? So it's not even practical that would ever be a road. Correct. Okay, moved by Councillor Benson Pope, seconded by Councillor Lord. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item 17, naming of new roads and private ways.
No.
Questions? Councillor Wiley.
So I'm just trying to play catch up here.
Yeah, no, that's why I don't like this happy to move stuff, because it gets a bit fast at the end. And we've sold off half the city and didn't realise we'd done it. But Councillor Walker, firstly, commentary in the middle of the meeting, I think we've got to get on top of that. But the other one is, even if everybody's read it, councillors may have questions they want to ask, and if we go too fast, we'll get in the way of their ability to ask those questions. Councillor Wiley.
Yeah, thank you. Just trying to move from paper to electronic. But there was a Cricket Way or Cricket... yeah, it was Cricket Avenue, and I'm just wondering...
I think it's gone to Field View.
It's got Field View and then Cricket Close and Cricket Drive. What was the reasoning about naming it? Cricket assessment of proposed name for Cricket Drive.
I believe that Cricket Drive wasn't the proposed name. I think it was Field View. I think they proposed two names, and one was because it was a former cricket ground, but of the two, the preferred is Field View because it looks over a field.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Sorry, Councillor Elder.
Just referencing Tarakahana Drive. I'm just wondering about the meaning of that word.
It's a Maori word for tractor or a similar vehicle.
Ah.
And it's got links because it's a business park and the first tenant was a tractor company. So,
Councillor Barker.
That's pretty cool.
Just a few questions around Oprah Drive, just about the, it's on page 218, and it had the assessment for the private road, and I just wonder whether there was supposed to be a no instead of a yes, where it says Oprah is an amalgamation or derivative of people's names and does not comply with the road naming policy. So I wonder whether that should be no instead of yes.
it does not comply.
Oh, okay, it was just in the...
Because it's a bunch of people's names combined together.
I just had yes and
we'll clarify that.
Overall
Sorry.
it had no, and then it had yes in the
Sorry.
the tick boxes. Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, then I move that the committee names New Road off Dukes. Well, actually, that we move all of the names A through F. All those in favour? Oh, I need a seconder, sorry. Councillor Staines. Anybody want to speak to it? Okay. Let me put it. All those in favour? Against? Carried. And now we have an adding of a name. Oh, well actually, I thought that had to go separately. Oh, it's carried now. Mr. Skinner's name is on the registry as well. Okay then, items for the chair. We have red light cameras.
Yes, I'd like to ask for the report that Ms Benson said that she would be able to get for us, I think, on our capacity to actually do something on that issue off our own bat, or whatever process might need to be followed to advocate for installation of same at someone else's expense, preferably.
And then I think, and that would also be, if it's even our authority, if it's actually the police or Ministry of Transport.
Yeah, well, obviously, in all the discussions that we've had, the elephant in the room is lack of enforcement, which is often driven by lack of funding. But I'm not convinced that enough attention is being given to the red light issue, anything else aside. And the media that the ODT produced on a number of intersections is pretty telling, and we do need to take action around that.
And then His Worship's request that the names of the affected parties be included.
Yeah, there's two things. Yeah, one, how we manage that, and I'm happy for them to be not made public or just be useful for us at least to be able to see them. And the other one was how elected member input into, or the interface between decisions of this body and the work of the Regional Transport Committee, which came out of a discussion on the drafting of the RLTP. But just how do we make those two things,
Yep.
get the two work plans connect somehow?
Captured that? Cool. Okay, anything else for the chair? I think we'll ask Ms Benson to give us the full gambit of what those cameras could do. Anything else? Then I call this meeting to a close. Thank you very much.